Hey guys, tonight we dive into a story that breathes behind the vending machines and concrete silence of Osaka's back alleys. Imagine narrow streets soaked in orange light, where bicycles click past shuttered shops, and somewhere behind a curtain, a desperate man quietly begs for another extension on his debt. The loan shark king of Osaka doesn't knock twice. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. His presence alone rebalances every room he steps into. Like gravity deciding to lean a little harder, you probably won't survive this one, not because of guns or glory, but because you'll realize how easy it is to fall into his kind of power. All it takes is one bad month, one favor you can't return. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I'm always curious to know who else is out there, drifting off with these stories. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Osaka at night is a soft hum wrapped in neon. The city doesn't sleep so much as it murmurs in low frequencies. Karaoke buzz from fifth-floor bars, the muted rattle of a pachinko ball, and the warm crackle of frying batter behind paper-thin stall walls. Down in Namba, the heart pulses louder. It's where alleyways split like capillaries, and vending machines blink like bored sentries. If you're standing here in the 1990s, you're likely within 2 blocks of a man who controls more of Osaka's debt than any bank manager ever will. He's not wearing a suit tonight, just a pressed white shirt, no tie, and an umbrella he doesn't open even in the drizzle. People call him Taro because they don't know his real name, and most never ask. You could brush past him on the street and think he's a tax clerk. You'd be wrong. He's the ledger no one audits, the breath behind a signature you regret. Tonight, he walks without noise. His shoes are soft-soled. His eyes scan doorways the way a cat scans for sleeping mice. He's not here to collect. Not yet. He's just checking the temperature, watching which businesses stay open, which ones have empty chairs, which ones are behind on their silent promise. No notes are taken. He keeps it all in his head, mapped like a train grid. Only he knows which stations have cracks in the rail. At a takoyaki stand, he pauses. Not for the food, but for the girl working the counter. Her apron is stained, but her knuckles are clean. New here, young, probably her first job. He says nothing, just watches. She doesn't see him. That's ideal. His phone buzzes once. An old flip model, nothing flashy. The text says, "Nakata late again." He closes the phone with a thumb. No anger, no reply. Nakata will pay. They always do. Or they leave something behind worth more than yen. He ducks under an awning where 2 old men smoke beside a delivery crate. One glances up, recognizes him, and subtly straightens his back. It's always like that. Adjustments people don't notice themselves making. Standing straighter, talking quieter. Not because he commands fear, but because he calibrates pressure like an engineer tunes a piano. He knows how to make a man owe him before the man even realizes he asked for help. He moves past the men, never breaking stride. Back in the late 80s, before the bubble burst, Taro wasn't even in the game. Just another drifting youth. No tattoos, no connections. But he saw something others didn't. How many people gambled with borrowed time, not just money? So when Japan's economic miracle started coughing and families began skipping bills, he stepped in, not with threats. Never threats. His first loans came folded in with favors, helping a struggling soba shop cover rent for a month. buying a pachinko addict scooter at just the right time, replacing a florist's broken freezer in exchange for quiet repayments. People forget how power often comes wrapped in kindness, or at least the appearance of it. That's how he built his name, not as a gangster, but as a helper. A guy who could fix things when the bank couldn't. They called it Mawari, the quiet turn. A loan that rotated around shame instead of interest rates. By 1993, he had over 70 borrowers, none of whom would call him a criminal. But none of them slept well either. Now, years later, he no longer makes the deals himself. That's what the umbrella runners are for. Young men and women with steady hands and expressions like elevator music. But every few nights, he walks the route, reminds himself of the smells, the faces, the exact way an izakaya's sign flickers when they've missed rent again. Mainstream history likes to talk about the big guns, the Yamaguchi Gumi, the Sumiyoshi Kai, the flashy names. But many people still think that the real power in 1990s Osaka belonged to men like Taro, quiet men, untouchable, not because they fought hard, but because they never left fingerprints. There's no dossier on him in any police station. Not a clear one. Just scattered notes. Maybe connected to small business debt cycle. Possible pachinko laundering. Nothing actionable. His name doesn't even show up on voter registries. It might not even be his name, and yet here he is, standing in the same alley he first walked as a teenager, watching the exact takoyaki stand where his mother once cried while clutching a 1,000 yen bill. He lights a cigarette, his only indulgence. Menthol, always one before bed. As the city exhales steam and electricity, Taro smiles softly. It's not joy. It's the kind of smile a spider makes when the web vibrates just right. Taro was not born in Osaka, though the city adopted him like a reluctant stray. He came from the far side of Kansai, closer to Wakayama, near the coast, in a fishing town too small for postcards. His real name is one of those quiet facts that floats in sealed government cabinets, somewhere between census data and forgotten tax forms. What mattered more was what his mother used to call him. Chibi Taro. Little Taro. The one who never cried, even when the rice pot was empty. It was hunger that taught him memory. The way his mother rationed soy sauce with water to make soup. The soft tap she made with her chopsticks on the empty bowl. 1, 2. Like an apology to gods they'd long stopped believing in. He learned how to read shame on her back, not her face. Her shoulders always told the truth. Slumped meant no money. Stiff meant she'd begged someone for help again. He was 8 when he saw her kneel in front of a pachinko owner, hands trembling. The man didn't yell. He laughed, took the money she had, and added another number to the bottom of her loan slip. That was the first time young Taro saw that power wasn't about yelling. It was about how softly you could change a person's direction. From that day on, he started collecting. Not debts, yet, but moments. He watched who borrowed, who lent, who left doors unlocked. The fishing town didn't notice. They only saw a quiet boy who never asked for seconds. At 12, his mother sent him to Osaka. Said his uncle would give him work. There was no uncle. Just a contact at a ramen shop who needed someone to wash bowls and not talk back. Taro didn't mind. The silence suited him, but the back room of the ramen shop taught him more than broth recipes. Late at night, the manager, an aging man with a crooked tie and eyes like grease puddles, would let small-time collectors count money at the back table. They'd open cloth envelopes, thumb through stacks of wrinkled yen, and speak in code. The lanterns are dim meant a bar was struggling. Too much vinegar in the rice meant a sushi joint had cops poking around. Taro never asked questions. He just wiped the table cleaner than necessary, kept tea warm, and remembered everything. By 15, he was running errands, delivering sealed envelopes to people who never made eye contact. Sometimes he'd get a meal out of it, sometimes a slap. Once, a girl his age opened the door, handed him a cupcake, and whispered, "Don't become like them." He never forgot that. One winter evening, the ramen shop's manager didn't come back from a walk. Heart failure. Or so they said. Some believed he'd crossed a line with a local Yakuza underboss. Others thought he just got too comfortable. Whatever it was, the backroom got quiet after that. For a week. Then a new man came in, younger, neater. He asked who knew the routes. Taro raised a hand. No hesitation. "You're too young," the man said. Taro didn't blink. "But I remember." The man paused. "Remember what?" "Everything," Taro replied. So they gave him a chance. One route, one envelope, one late-night knock. It was a sushi shop near Tennoji. Small, one counter. The owner was waiting, eyes red. He didn't argue, just paid and bowed. Taro bowed back, deeper. He didn't smile. That's when it began. He didn't charge interest at first, just expectations. If someone delayed, he'd sit in their shop, not say a word, just order tea, drink it slowly, and leave. It worked. Shame was more efficient than violence. By the time he was 20, he wasn't delivering envelopes anymore. Others were delivering his, and they all knew he had no gang behind him, no emblem, just precision. Many people still think that's why the Yakuza left him alone. Because he was untouchable? No. Because he didn't play their game. He wasn't trying to be feared. He was trying to be necessary. By 1990, he had over 100 businesses linked to him, not through contracts, but habits. The fishmonger who always borrowed 10,000 yen before Golden Week. The noodle shop owner who needed new stools every August. The karaoke bar woman who never paid in full, but always hosted his collectors with tea and jazz music. Taro's clients weren't desperate. They were familiar. They didn't flinch when his name came up. They just said things like, "Yeah, I owe Taro." The same way someone might say, "I owe my uncle. He made debt feel domestic." But even kings have tipping points. He began tracking repayment not by numbers, but by behavior. If someone smiled too much, they were hiding something. If they flinched when someone else's name was mentioned, they were likely juggling debts. He kept profiles in his head, never on paper. His mind was a database indexed by size and hesitations. There's a theory, shared over too many drinks in too many bar corners, that Taro once forgave a 50 million yen debt from a retired enforcer because the man bowed low enough to kiss the floor. Another story says he once made a loan conditional on a woman feeding her cat 3 times a day, because the cat's health would indicate if she was spiraling again. Hard to verify. But what is known, no one ever borrowed from him twice without thinking about that first moment they accepted his quiet offer. Do you remember the day he left with the first money? It wasn't a payday. It was a test. He always gave more than needed, just enough to trap someone in their own hopes. Now, standing again in the rain-lit alley, he watches the new ramen boy through the shop window. Same apron he used to wear, same grease on the counter. Different time. He exhales slowly, flicks ash toward the gutter, and walks on. The back rooms of Osaka never disappeared. They just got better lighting. By the mid-1990s, pachinko parlors were evolving. No longer just chaotic caves of metal balls and cigarette haze. Now they glowed with pastel plastic, flashing lights, and computerized counters. But the addiction stayed the same, and so did the debt. If anything, the desperation just came in cleaner packaging. And that suited Taro perfectly. He never cared about the games. He didn't play. He just watched. Sat on the second floor of a nondescript building across from 3 parlors in the Shinimamiya neighborhood, sipping canned coffee and making quiet notes in his head. One of his runners had set up a fake business there, a supposed real estate outfit that never sold a single property. But the window view was perfect. From here, Taro learned patterns. Not from data, not from surveillance software, just from human routine. Which players arrived before the machines even powered on? Which ones stayed until the cleaning crew kicked them out? Which ones borrowed from friends outside the entrance, then went in again? The same cycle, every week, every time. It was in that second-floor room that he first built what would later be known, whispered, unofficially, as the pipeline. The principle was simple. He wouldn't wait for people to come to him. He'd get ahead of them. He created a web of low-level employees, mostly young part-timers or women in need of quiet work, who posed as service agents near pachinko centers. These weren't traditional loan sharks. They didn't even mention money at first. They offered things, umbrellas on rainy days, small change when the machines didn't accept bills, warm hand towels, just kindness, casual, dismissible. Then came the slips. If you're ever in a pinch, this person helps people like us. Folded papers, no names, just a number and a symbol, a small umbrella in blue ink. The symbol became legend among Osaka's nocturnal crowd. No violence attached, no threats. Just a way out if you needed it. And people always needed it. Taro made sure the loans had no contracts, no lawyers, just memory and the implied shame of not repaying a kindness. It worked better than any legal document. People would cross neighborhoods to settle their debts, just to avoid the humiliation of having their name quietly blacklisted from the umbrella system. Within 2 years, the pipeline connected over 40 pachinko centers across southern Osaka. Every week, thousands of yen flowed upward. Not in briefcases, but in phone credits, shopping vouchers, vending machine codes, and handwritten acknowledgments. Taro rarely touched cash anymore. Mainstream historians love talking about Japan's economic stagnation in the 90s. The lost decade, they call it. But many people still think that for men like Taro, it was a golden age. Because when hope shrinks, desperation becomes scalable. His network didn't wear suits. They wore uniforms from convenience stores, delivery outfits, karaoke chains. You never knew if the guy handing you a ramen flyer was also the one tracking your debt history. But inside it all, there was still structure. Taro created tiers, collectors, observers, runners, silhouettes who answered to no name, only timing. You didn't get promoted by violence. You moved up by silence, by how little you made people complain. Taro liked systems. He trusted them more than loyalty. Once, one of his earliest collectors, a boy named Kenji who used to run soba for him, asked why Taro didn't just let people fall behind and raise the interest like other sharks did. Taro had looked up, expression calm. Because profit is noisy, he said, but leverage is quiet. The lesson stuck. And it explained why so many people kept paying him even when no one was chasing them. But the pipeline didn't just bring in money. It brought in weight, influence, and eventually, curiosity from people he never wanted to impress. Around 1994, A middle-tier Yakuza group called Kosei Kai started sniffing around. They controlled much of the western Osaka loan rackets, and Taro's quiet umbrella model was bleeding their customer base. One night, two men in black coats stepped into a bar where one of Taro's female runners worked. They didn't threaten her, didn't touch her, just smiled and asked how much she liked the little umbrella notes she passed out. She didn't respond, just reported the incident that same night. Taro's response wasn't a counter threat. It was silence. Complete operational blackout for 72 hours. No collections, no loans, no appearances. It created panic. Borrowers who usually made scheduled repayments suddenly couldn't. Runners vanished from their usual haunts, and just like that, Kosekai's income dipped for 3 days. Then, on the fourth night, Taro sent a single envelope to their lieutenant. Inside was a one-sentence note. "Do you prefer noise?" Nothing happened after that. The umbrella runners returned, collections resumed, and Kosekai stopped asking questions. It wasn't power in the traditional sense. It was what came before power, control of the variables. People always assumed that Taro made his fortune from fear, but those who knew better understood. He made his empire from patience. He didn't drive, he didn't fly, he took the train. Every day, same car, same stop, same door. So collectors knew where to find him, if they really had to. But few ever did, and on those rides, he never looked out the window. He watched reflections, not his, theirs. Passengers checking phones, students giggling, office workers biting nails. He read faces like ledgers. There's a story, again, unverifiable, that he once forgave a loan because he saw the borrower feeding an injured crow on the station bench. No words were exchanged. But the next day, the runner never showed to collect. Fact or fable, it didn't matter. What mattered was that people believed it. Believed he noticed everything, and so they behaved accordingly. Tonight, back in that second-floor room, Taro sips coffee and watches a man in a gray tracksuit enter his 15th straight day at the same pachinko center. He's borrowing from someone. Probably a cousin. Maybe an old coworker. Doesn't matter. The moment he accepts that umbrella slip, and he will, he'll step onto the first rung of a ladder he won't even see. The room is quiet. Osaka glows beneath him like a slot machine just waiting to be pulled. Taro's first real collection job didn't involve broken bones or bruised faces. It involved a lie, a door, and a deadline. He was 16, still technically a ramen shop runner, when a regular named Mr. Endo began missing his usual repayment days. Endo ran a second-hand electronics stall in Nipponbashi, the sort of cluttered basement nook where CRT televisions still flickered, and Game Boys from a decade ago were stacked in leaning piles. The man was older, maybe mid-40s, always wore a red scarf even in summer, and had a soft spot for trying to win claw machines in the arcade next door. Taro had observed Endo's rhythms for months, when he opened, when he ate, when he laughed too loudly at a broken karaoke speaker. He'd never spoken to the man directly. That wasn't his job. But when one of the regular collectors caught the flu, the manager motioned to Taro and simply said, "You know the stall. Try." It was raining. A spring drizzle, soft and inconsistent, the kind that seems to pause whenever you lower your umbrella. Taro didn't own one. Just a windbreaker 2 sizes too big, and a small sealed envelope in his coat pocket. Inside, a note with the amount owed, the date of the original loan, and the name Endo scrawled in blue pen. He stood outside the electronics shop for 15 minutes before walking in. There was no bell, just the smell of warmed plastic and the faint buzz of cathode rays. Endo looked up, saw the boy, and frowned. "You're not a cop, are you?" Taro shook his head and handed him the envelope. The man took it, read it, and chuckled once, a brittle sound. "So they're sending kids now?" Taro didn't respond. He had no script, just the knowledge that he'd be in trouble if he came back empty-handed. Endo sighed, rubbed his face, and gestured to the clutter behind him. "If you see something worth 30,000 yen here, let me know. I'll throw in the dust for free." Still silent, Taro looked around. He noticed the claw machine Endo always played had been wheeled into a corner. A dusty prize still dangled. Mid-air, behind the glass, he pointed at it. "Why do you play if you never win?" Endo blinked, surprised by the question. "Because sometimes losing feels better than waiting." A pause hung between them. Taro walked closer. "Then I'll wait." "What?" "I'll come back tomorrow, same time. You either pay or I'll wait again and again." Endo laughed again, louder this time. "You serious?" Taro nodded. The man stared at him for a while. Then he reached into a drawer, pulled out a crumpled envelope, and slid it across the counter. "I had it ready. Just didn't want to see their faces." Taro bowed deeply and left without a word. That was the first collection. Clean. No shouting, no force. Just pressure. Applied like a damp cloth, not a hammer. Later that evening, the manager raised an eyebrow. "He paid?" Taro nodded. "How?" I waited. From that moment, his reputation shifted. He wasn't just the quiet kid with a good memory. He was the one who could collect without saying more than a sentence. The jobs became more regular after that. Not constant. Just enough to test his consistency. A woman behind on her wedding dress store's backroom rent. A man who borrowed for a dog's surgery and then forgot both payments and appointments. A pair of brothers who swore the other had the money. Each one required something different. With the woman, he complimented a dress and let the silence drag until she reached for her purse. With the dog owner, he left a box of milk bones by the door, untouched. With the brothers, he visited only one, knowing jealousy would do the rest. He was crafting a skill most people never learn: calibrated discomfort. Many people still think that intimidation comes from presence, but Taro knew better. It came from implication. The idea that you'd be seen, remembered, weighed, and found lacking by someone who never raised his voice. By the time he was 17, his deliveries included small blue cards. Each one bore the umbrella symbol and a single number. No logos, no names, no branding. It wasn't a business. It was a rumor with structure. Clients often mistook the cards as favors. In truth, they were hooks, the kind that sank deeper the longer you pretended they weren't there. Some borrowers framed them, thinking it meant they were special. Others burned them, hoping that would erase the memory. It didn't. One night, a small restaurant owner named Shimura sent back his repayment through a delivery boy. But inside the envelope, Taro found something else. A note that read, "You're too young to be this cold." He folded the note, placed it in a shoebox, and said nothing. He never collected on Shimura again. But he also never helped him again. Years later, that restaurant would close after a grease fire. Some say Shimura had been drinking more. Others whisper that someone delayed the fire truck call by 5 minutes. No proof. No questions asked. By 1995, Taro wasn't seen much in person anymore. His network was doing most of the work. But every now and then, a debt would stagnate, hover just beyond resolution, just shy of clean. That's when they called him directly. He didn't like phones. Too loud, too permanent. But for these calls, he made exceptions. Come, that was all he'd say. And they understood. He'd show up, always dressed plainly. No suit, no jewelry, just a crisp shirt, clean shoes, and the exact amount of time it took for the debtor to sweat through their collar. He never touched them, never raised his hand, just stood still, waited, and walked out after exactly 7 minutes. Most paid before the next sunrise. Tonight, in the shadow of a small karaoke bar, he leans against a railing and watches an old man sweep beer cans into a corner bin. It's Endo. Older, slower, but still wearing that same red scarf. Taro doesn't speak, just watches. Endo turns, senses something, and squints into the dark. Their eyes meet, and Endo bows, slow, respectful, deep. Taro bows back. Then he's gone again, swallowed into the rhythm of a city that never forgets. There are lessons you carry in silence, ones that never get written down, but repeat themselves in the rhythms of your breath. For Taro, one of the earliest and deepest came from a man who was already dying when they met. It was in the back room of a soba shop near Kuramon Market, one of those shadowy Osaka eateries that never bothered with signage because the right people always knew where to go. Taro was 17, barely finished with his last bull run, when the collector named Masuda invited him to sit. "You're too stiff," the man said, gesturing with a cigarette. "Even your thoughts creak when you walk." Taro didn't argue. He just nodded. Masuda was older, early 50s maybe, but his lungs were younger than his face. He had a belly that moved like it was trying to escape his belt, and the kind of voice that made you think of asphalt and cheap shochu. He'd been collecting money in Osaka since the early 70s, back when debts came with brass knuckles and IOUs written on cigarette packs. That night, he poured Taro a drink, not alcohol, just barley tea, and told him a story. "Do you know why people hate us?" Taro waited. "Because we remind them they're fragile, that a birthday, a hospital bill, one stupid choice, they're all just one step from crawling. We're not monsters, we're mirrors." He took a slow sip, then leaned in. "But here's the thing they never teach you. You never lend what you can't repossess. That's the rule, always." Taro tilted his head. "Repossession?" Masuda grinned. "I don't mean furniture, I mean leverage. If someone fails you, you better be able to walk into their life and rearrange it. Not burn it, rearrange it. Make them feel like they owe you for falling behind." Taro sat with that for a long time. Masuda died 6 weeks later. Lung cancer. Rumor was he'd known for a year, but kept collecting anyway. Said debts didn't wait for chemo. At the funeral, Taro stood at the back, said nothing, and left before the incense burned out. But he never forgot the rule. That became the foundation of his next phase. You see, lending was never the hard part. Anyone with money could hand it out. The challenge was turning debt into permanent motion, like wind in a tunnel. Something that never stopped pressing. That's how Taro built his terms. On the surface, his loans were absurdly simple. No interest, no contract, no collateral. Just the umbrella card, the number, and a repayment date whispered once. But there were layers. Miss a payment, and the next collector would visit your mother's favorite bento shop. Not to threaten, just to buy lunch and ask a few friendly questions. Suddenly, everyone around you knew your name, but couldn't remember where they'd heard it. If you lied about your job, your workplace would get a visit from someone handing out survey forms. If you tried to run, your favorite corner seat at the arcade would always be occupied. You weren't punished, you were rearranged. And the strangest part? Most borrowers complied, not from fear, from confusion. The sense that they were being managed by something too fluid to fight. Around this time, Taro stopped delivering personally, but he trained 3 collectors himself, Junko, Harada, and a boy named Naoya. Each came from different walks. Junko was a single mother, Harada a disgraced banker, and Naoya a dropout with near photographic memory. They weren't enforcers. They were readers, each trained to observe body language like linguists decoding dialects. Junko once told Taro, "You don't send us to collect money. You send us to collect patterns." He didn't deny it. Each collector was assigned a handful of clients, not regions. Taro believed in personal accountability. "If they lie to you," he said once, "you should feel it in your bones." And it worked. Debt became less about finance and more about rhythm. One misstep, and the whole dance shifted. His collectors didn't need to yell. They just adjusted the beat until clients danced to new music. Still, Taro watched from a distance. He read reports, not printed, but verbal. Every collector had to return once a week and speak aloud everything they'd noticed. No notes, no summaries, just storytelling. That's when he really listened. It was through those quiet, face-to-face recitations that Taro sharpened his edge. Each report wasn't just a list of who paid and who didn't. It was a window into how people moved. Junko would describe how a man adjusted his necktie 3 times before answering the door. Harada once noted a subtle change in a client's hallway, an extra pair of children's shoes that hadn't been there the week before. Naoya, always precise, logged emotional temperature through the frequency of sighs, tracking debt stress like a heartbeat. Taro listened without interruption, rarely giving direct feedback. But the next time he dispatched a collector, their route would change. A timing altered, a client reassigned. He was adjusting the city's tempo like a conductor with no sheet music, only instinct. But he wasn't infallible. There was one case, an exception that stuck like a pebble in a shoe. A middle-aged man named Fukuda ran a stationery shop on the edge of Suminoe. Quiet, paid on time, never missed a week. Naoya flagged him anyway. "Too perfect," he'd said, like someone hiding the exact amount of trouble. Taro nodded, but let it go. He believed in silence, his and theirs. 2 months later, Fukuda was found unconscious in his back room. Gas leak. Authorities said it was accidental, but a scribbled note, half-scorched and reeking of ink, suggested otherwise. Taro never shared what the note said. He read it once, pocketed it, and never spoke of it again. From that moment, he added something new to his routine. Every month, without fail, he personally visited 3 borrowers chosen at random, not to collect, not to speak, just to observe. He started referring to it internally as his Masuda circuit, a silent tribute to the man who'd taught him never to lend what he couldn't touch. These visits were short. No one ever saw him come or go. He'd walk into a bar or a shop, order something minimal, watch the owner's hands, the way their smile sat on their face, then leave a tip that matched exactly the amount they owed him. It was a game, but also a test. If they returned the tip later, quietly, respectfully, they stayed in the system. If they kept it, they disappeared from his books. Debt, in Taro's world, was sacred, but it was never permanent. It lived or died based on attention, not accounting. He'd once told Junko over a cup of hot oolong, "People think debt is weight, but it's not. It's motion. It moves you closer or further from yourself." She'd blinked. "Is that something Masuda told you?" Taro shook his head. "That one's mine." It was around this time, 1995, that Osaka began shifting again. Not just economically, but culturally. The neon districts that had once seemed eternal began to flicker. New taxes rolled in. Licensing boards cracked down on shady businesses. Even pachinko centers faced new regulations about payouts and proximity to schools. To most loan sharks, this was a warning bell. But to Taro, it was an opportunity. He started pivoting. No more envelopes, no more umbrella slips. Instead, he invested in services. Legitimate on paper, umbrella delivery companies, bento meal services, freelance janitorial collectives. He embedded his collectors into contracts that technically made them employees, not agents. They earned salaries, paid taxes, even received health insurance, all funded by businesses with perfect books and shadow ledgers. Junko became the supervisor of a senior meal route. She delivered hot lunches to elderly borrowers who didn't know their quiet nods were being tracked like payment confirmations. Naoya began teaching math tutoring to teens whose parents had borrowed school fees. If a child missed a lesson, it was more than an absence. It was a flare in Taro's ledger. Harada ran a consultancy for failing restaurants. In truth, he gave owners 3 choices: reorganize with Taro's help, sell quietly to a front company, or watch their credit disappear overnight. It was seamless, beautiful, in a quiet, grim sort of way. Many people still think that these shifts marked the true birth of Osaka's modern underground economy. Not the flashy, knife-to-throat kind seen in movies, but the subtle, systemic integration of shadow debt into daylight systems. Taro wasn't just a loan shark anymore. He was a rhythm, a current. You didn't see him, but you felt him when your bento was late, when your cleaner suddenly quit, when your karaoke machine glitched after you delayed payment on your mic lease. And yet, he was still present. He still took the train, still visited the same backroom soba shop once a month. The new manager didn't know who he was, just that he always tipped and always left before the evening rush. Still wrote nothing down, still trusted memory over records, still believed that the only real power was when people arranged their lives around your silence. And that silence, it echoed through alleys, through ledgers, through debts no one could explain. But everyone obeyed. By 1996, Taro's name had largely vanished from casual conversation. Not out of fear, but out of practicality. His clients didn't refer to him directly anymore. Instead, they used phrases like the schedule man or umbrella-san, or sometimes just a vague hand gesture followed by a quiet nod. It wasn't a code, it was an instinct, like touching your pocket to check your wallet, automatic, unspoken. That was the year the pachinko pipeline matured into a full-scale system. By then, Taro's network extended through more than 70 pachinko parlors and slot cafes, not just in Osaka, but stretching into Kobe, Wakayama, even Kyoto. Most of the operators didn't know his face, but they knew the system worked. They knew that once those quiet umbrella slips started circulating through their customer base, delinquency rates fell and turnover went up. Everyone played longer. Everyone came back, and Taro always got his cut. His organization still didn't have a name. His collectors didn't have business cards. The only thing consistent across the entire operation was one symbol: a tiny hand-stamped blue umbrella, no larger than a thumbnail, sometimes printed in a corner of a paper bag, sometimes on a napkin, once tattooed onto a runner's ankle after a drunken dare, though Taro disapproved of that kind of permanence. The umbrella was never explained, and that was the point. It began as a joke between Junko and Harada during an early collection day. Something about how most of their clients seemed to only open the door when it rained. They said Taro was like an umbrella, never wanted, always needed. He overheard it once, chuckled softly, and adopted it that same week. Under that little blue symbol, debts flowed smoother than water. Taro had refined his terms by then too. Loans weren't just money exchanges. They were entire behavioral contracts cloaked in the shape of convenience. A collector would offer $30,000 to a struggling karaoke bar in exchange for, on the surface, timely repayment and future bento orders. But between the lines, the bar would also be expected to host collectors during route reviews, offer free tea to first-time clients, and discreetly report which customers seemed too eager to spend money. It was a surveillance ecosystem that never called itself that. Taro had weaponized hospitality. Meanwhile, his back-end operations became more like a consulting firm. Harada formalized training for junior collectors, designing entire scripts based on emotional timing. When to pause, when to nod, when to lean 1 centimeter forward and say nothing. Naoya started assembling profile dossiers, not on paper, never digital, but through verbal recitation and nightly memory drills. "You have to remember their debts the way they forget them," he once said. "That's the only way we stay ahead." And Junko, sharp-eyed, unsentimental Junko, became Taro's de facto consigliere. She was the only one who could speak plainly to him without softening her tone. "You're building a city," she said once, "but you haven't decided if you want it to last." He didn't respond, because even he didn't know. The truth was, Taro never imagined building an empire. He had always seen himself as a caretaker, a necessary shadow cast by a broken system. Banks rejected people. He welcomed them. Society labeled failures. He monetized them. But Junko wasn't wrong. What he'd created now pulsed like a living thing. His debt map had its own gravity. When a new pachinko parlor opened in Tennoji, Taro's collectors had a route ready before the first customer walked through the door. When a liquor shop burned down in Nishinari, his network shifted within hours to offer loans to nearby vendors. It wasn't magic, it was preparation and fear. Not fear of him, but fear of being forgotten. Clients weren't scared of punishment. They were scared of being cut off. Scared of no longer receiving those folded umbrella slips with clean corners and quiet handwriting. Taro understood this deeply. That's why he introduced his most dangerous idea yet, provisional debt. It started small. A man in Sakai City borrowed Y $50,000 to cover repairs to his father's bicycle shop. A week later, he missed the first soft deadline. But instead of sending a collector, Taro's team sent a note, unsigned, saying, "Your silence is a signal. Would you like to continue this relationship?" The man repaid the entire loan the next day. Then it happened again. And again. Soon, collectors were no longer just chasing debts. They were testing commitment. Miss a payment, and you might not be reminded. You might just vanish from the web. And once removed, re-entry was almost impossible. This system, ironically, bred loyalty. Clients called, begged, even cried just to stay in his ledger. They didn't want money. They wanted acknowledgement. They wanted proof that someone was keeping score. Many people still think that this phase, 1996 to 1997, was the peak of Taro's influence. Not because of how much money he controlled, but because of how few hands actually touched it. His economy was barely tangible, and yet it worked. He no longer needed muscle. He had something better. Anticipation. Clients feared missing a payment not because of what would happen, but because they didn't know what would happen. That unknown was more powerful than a threat, but not everyone admired the elegance. Some saw it as weakness, as arrogance, and one of them decided to test the silence. It happened on a Wednesday, a gray-skied afternoon in Shinsekai. One of Taro's collectors, a boy no older than 20 named Riku, knocked on a door he'd visited a dozen times before. The client, a former parlor manager named Ishida, had borrowed more than most, but he'd always paid. Never a problem, until that day. Riku knocked twice. The door opened, and then it closed again. With a fist, Ishida struck him. Hard. No words, just violence. Riku didn't fight back. He left quietly, reported the incident, and went home with a cracked cheekbone and a blank stare. Taro received the message that same evening. He said nothing for 48 hours. Then, quietly, Ishida's name was removed from every system. No collectors, no notes, no visits. The man had vanished, but was never pursued. A month later, his electricity was cut. Clerical error. 2 weeks after that, his parlor job applications were denied. Overlooked. Soon, he was seen panhandling at a train station, clutching a bent umbrella with no cover. He never asked for help, because he knew why it had happened. That was how Taro retaliated. Not with retribution, but with relevance removal. He didn't erase your debts. He erased you from the ledger of movement. And in a city like Osaka, that was a kind of death. There's a certain point in every underworld operation where the criminals stop pretending they're not businessmen, and the businessmen stop pretending they're not criminals. For Taro, that line blurred completely the year he began issuing nameless cards. These weren't umbrella slips. Those had served their purpose. They were entry points, whispers. The new cards were different. Matte black, no logos, no numbers. Just a small, ink-stamped square in the bottom corner, barely visible, only noticeable under certain angles of light. They weren't handed out like candy. They had to be earned. Clients who had repaid 5 consecutive loans without reminders, who had quietly performed favors without being asked, who had adjusted their behaviors in ways that suited the network's growth. Those clients received a visit. No call, no warning. Just a knock on the door and an envelope slid inside. Inside, the black card and a handwritten note that read, "You've been observed. Proceed accordingly." The card came with invisible perks. Suddenly, their applications went through faster. Their delivery routes were prioritized. Their customers inexplicably increased. The world bent around them, just slightly. Many of them never connected the dots, but a few did, and they knew better than to speak of it. It was one of Taro's boldest moves, and the beginning of what insiders would later refer to as the umbrella market, a shadow commerce of trust-based power where loyalty bought more than loans. It bought immunity, but there were risks. With power came visibility. And visibility attracts those who believe they deserve the same seat at the table. Enter the Kishi brothers, twin sons of a long-defunct Osaka clan. They had grown up during the bubble era and never quite adapted to its collapse. They'd been runners, extortionists, small-time punks. But they had ambition and a dangerous misunderstanding of what power looked like. In late 1996, they approached one of Taro's collectors near Dotonbori. Junko, to be precise. They didn't recognize her, of course. That was the whole point. Junko was sipping canned coffee outside a kombini when they cornered her. Said they had a business proposition for her boss. Something about merging networks, better collection reach, mutual interests. She listened, didn't flinch, then handed them a napkin. On it, she'd written a single sentence: "Merge your silence with mine." The brothers laughed, insulted her, then walked away. 2 days later, their favorite contact at a local supplier ghosted them. A week after that, their collector routes dried up. By New Year's, they were back to hawking stolen CDs from the back of a van. Taro never mentioned them, didn't need to. His system had become reactive, like an immune system that identifies infection and quietly purges it without raising the body's temperature. But not all intrusions were so clumsy. That winter, a political aide from Osaka's city hall, young, ambitious, overly confident, requested a private meeting with Taro. Sent a handwritten letter. Too formal, too flowery. Taro ignored it. The aide sent another, this one with a name, a real one, and a reference to a mutual acquaintance, an aging karaoke chain owner who had once defaulted, then been quietly rehabilitated through Taro's bento root program. Taro accepted the meeting. Reluctantly, they met in a hotel lounge. No cameras, no staff within earshot. Just 2 cups of black tea and a wide window looking down over the city like an indifferent god. The aide, let's call him Nishikawa, smiled too much, spoke in metaphors, tried to flatter. Taro sipped his tea. "I'm here," Nishikawa said, "because people in certain departments believe what you're doing might be economically helpful. If we understood it better." Taro didn't blink. "What don't you understand?" Nishikawa leaned forward. "How it scales, and whether it benefits everyone." There it was, the pitch dressed as concern. Taro paused, then answered with a question. "Are you asking for inclusion or immunity?" Nishikawa froze mid-sip. Taro continued. "Because inclusion is expensive, but immunity is dangerous. People only ask for immunity when they've already done something stupid." Nishikawa never finished his tea. He left with his ego intact, but his intentions amputated. Weeks later, he resigned for personal reasons. That interaction marked a shift. Taro realized that what he'd built, accidentally, organically, was starting to resemble infrastructure. The kind that governments fear. The kind that competitors envy. The kind that citizens whisper about. He didn't like it. Power, in his eyes, had never been the goal. Control was a side effect. He wanted movement, motion, the ongoing dance of cause and effect where people, debts, and favors created just enough friction to keep him relevant. He didn't want to own Osaka. He wanted to nudge it. So he adjusted. He slowed expansion, capped collector routes, began rotating his active districts every 45 days, never operating in the same neighborhood for more than 6 weeks. Clients were confused. Some begged to be reinstated immediately. Others tried to contact him directly. He ignored them all. Even Junko questioned the strategy. "Are you shrinking to survive?" she asked. "No," he replied. "I'm shrinking to disappear." And for a time it worked. The blue umbrella cards became rarer. Black cards, even more so. Some started treating them like folklore. My cousin saw one once. "I heard if you hold it under moonlight, it glows." Taro smiled at those stories, let them spread, because he knew the truth. The less people saw of him, the more they felt him. Tonight, as he walks through the covered arcades near Nipponbashi, he passes vending machines blinking like bored sentries. Rain taps the rooftops above. People duck their heads and hurry between shops, unaware that the man in the gray coat passing them used to decide whether their favorite ramen shop lived or died. He pauses near a closed bookstore. Inside, dust blankets everything. A memory rises. A collector once hid IOUs between the pages of unsold dictionaries here. Taro smiles faintly, not from nostalgia, from certainty. The system may shrink, the names may fade, but debts, they linger, especially the ones you think you've forgotten. The Osaka suburbs are quieter than the city's belly. Less neon, more rust, more sky. It's the kind of place where the rain doesn't bounce off pavement with drama, but sinks quietly into cracked tile roofs and old tatami seams. And it's here, in the dim hush of Sakai, that Taro's operation quietly doubled in size. Not through recruitment, not through territory wars, but through food. It started with a simple observation. People pay back debts faster when they're full. Taro had always watched the way hunger shaped behavior. He saw how clients acted differently on an empty stomach, sharper tempers, weaker posture, more risk-seeking decisions. So he made a pivot. He began distributing hot bentos to select clients, not as charity and not as a bribe, but as a ritual. It began with just 10 lunches, hand-delivered by Junko on an old electric bicycle. The meals were decent: rice, fish, vegetables, pickled things, and always neatly boxed. Inside each was a small folded paper napkin with a familiar stamp, the blue umbrella. There was no charge, no follow-up. But 2 days later, 9 of the 10 clients made full payments ahead of schedule. He tried it again. This time, 20 bentos, then 50. Payment compliance jumped. Junko, skeptical as always, asked why they weren't billing for the meals. "We are," Taro replied, "just not on a menu." The bentos weren't just food. They were emotional markers, a reminder that someone was watching. Someone cared, but conditionally. Many people still think this strategy came from a place of kindness, but those who worked closest to Taro knew better. He wasn't trying to feed bellies. He was feeding patterns. Clients began associating repayment with being seen. If they paid, the bento came. If they didn't, it didn't. No threats, no calls, just the absence of warmth. And people will do strange things to avoid going cold. Soon, Taro established a full network of kitchens, most of them operating out of back rooms in ramen shops, izakayas, or cafes whose owners were already in his debt web. The ingredients were bought wholesale. The cooks were paid in cash and silence. Each delivery route was monitored like a supply chain. Punctuality, client reactions, leftovers returned. Naoya developed a system for reading data from the leftovers alone. "If they don't finish the rice," he said once, "they're either sick or depressed. If they leave the pickles, they're probably angry. If they eat everything but the fish, they're not taking you seriously." It sounded like superstition, but he was rarely wrong. Collectors now came with trays instead of threats. Repayment became synonymous with comfort. Even Osaka's working-class neighborhoods, long wary of loan sharks, began referring to Taro's system with an odd fondness. The bento man, some called him. The one who never asks twice. His reach expanded without force, yet with growth came fragility. A small misstep, and the illusion would crack, and that crack came, as it always does, from someone too clever for their own good. His name was Shunji, a young parlor manager in Tsuruhashi. Early 30s, slick hair, fast talk, and a habit of borrowing just before 3-day weekends. Taro's collectors marked him as unreliable, but manageable, until Shunji started gaming the bento system. He learned that bento deliveries preceded increased scrutiny, so he began refusing meals. "No need," he'd say, flashing a rehearsed smile. "I'm grateful, but I already ate." It was harmless at first, but then his repayment slipped. Small delays, partial amounts, vague excuses. Junko flagged it. Taro paid him a visit personally. They met at dusk, on a quiet footbridge overlooking a canal that hadn't seen clean water in decades. Shunji arrived 5 minutes late, adjusting his sleeves like someone about to win an argument. Taro stood still, holding a wrapped bento. He extended it. Shunji hesitated. "I told your lady, I'm good." "Really?" Taro didn't speak. After a long silence, Shunji took the box, held it, then tried to hand it back. Taro didn't move. Eventually, Shunji lowered his arm. I didn't want to be part of something that made me feel tracked," Taro said finally. Shunji blinked. "Debts track themselves," Taro continued. "The meals are reminders. You ignore reminders. You get forgotten." Shunji laughed nervously. "You're not going to break my legs or anything, right?" "No." Taro turned to leave. "I'm just not going to feed you again." 2 weeks later, Shunji's parlor suffered a supply chain glitch. His usual vendor stopped delivering. His staff started arriving late. A karaoke machine in the back sparked and smoked. Nothing violent, nothing direct, just disruption. And Shunji? He began making payments on time again. Sometimes he even left an apology note in his envelope. The collectors understood. Everyone did. The bento wasn't food. It was a contract. Taro's operation thrived in this dance of quiet consequence. Around this time, he shifted one final detail: the way debts were initiated. Instead of handing out umbrella slips in person, collectors began leaving small origami figures on clients' doors. Simple paper umbrellas, each folded by hand. Inside was a number, no signature, no explanation. If you called the number, you entered the system. If you didn't, You never heard from them again. It was the ultimate test of consent, and people called. Of course they did. Curiosity is more powerful than fear, especially when wrapped in mystery. By the end of 1997, Taro's name hadn't been spoken aloud in months, but his scent was on the fish broth in Nishinari. His echo lived in the quiet buzz of vending machines. His influence hummed beneath the rice cookers in 50 kitchens, and in the back rooms of bars, sometimes between bites of hot karaj. People would say things like, "You know, I used to owe someone, but I don't anymore." And someone else might reply, "Are you sure?" Because in Osaka, debts didn't always come with reminders. Sometimes they came with a warm meal and the unshakable feeling that someone, somewhere, was still keeping track. By early 1998, Taro's face had become a kind of ghost story among the younger collectors. Not because it was rarely seen. He still made his rounds, still took the train, still showed up at the same shops on the first Thursday of each month, but because none of the new recruits could remember when they'd actually seen him. He was always just gone a moment before they arrived, or present a moment before they realized it. It wasn't theatrics. Taro simply knew the value of not being available. Availability invited conversation, questions, interruptions. He preferred precision. Appear only when the absence starts to ache. Leave just before anyone gets too comfortable. The city, meanwhile, was changing again. The outskirts of Osaka were starting to gentrify. Cranes rose where old bathhouses once stood. Family-owned storefronts vanished overnight, replaced by sleek signs and unfamiliar fonts. New investors, mostly from Tokyo, were buying up entire blocks with the ease of pressing a button. It was a problem, not for the old networks. The Yakuza were already repositioning, but for Taro, whose operation relied on familiarity. He needed clients who had roots in their neighborhoods, debts that behaved like seasons. This new money had no memory, so he did something unusual. He reached out. Through Junko, he arranged a series of informal meetings, not with developers, but with the people developers left behind. Displaced grocers, evicted bar owners, disconnected shopkeepers now working gig jobs. He didn't offer them loans. He offered them roles. "You know your street," he'd say, through Junko or Harada. "Now you just need to listen differently." It was subtle recruitment. They became watchers, not collectors. No money exchanged. Just observations. Who moved in? Who moved out? Who paid in cash? Who didn't tip? Who asked too many questions? In exchange, these watchers received support. Small stipends, job leads, help relocating elderly parents. It wasn't about loyalty. It was about anchoring, making sure the city's heartbeat didn't change its rhythm too quickly. Naoya, ever the pattern obsessive, began mapping these watcher reports like constellations. Dots on a wall-sized board in a backroom office no one else was allowed to enter. The map shifted weekly. Junko once joked it looked like a subway system designed by a poet. Taro only glanced at it once. "Don't show me where they are," he said. "Tell me where they'll pause." Naoya didn't understand at first, but weeks later, he found it. A pattern of hesitation among new renters in a recently renovated block of Naniwa. 4 apartments in the same building, each tenant, late with utilities, each using convenience store Wi-Fi, each visiting the same corner yakitori stall within 5 days of moving in. He sent a runner to the stall, a quiet girl named Emiko. She listened. Turns out, the stall owner had been approached by an outside group. Not local, not even Tokyo-based. Possibly Chinese capital. They were asking questions about the neighborhood, about who controls what. It was a warning bell, and Taro answered in the only way he knew how. Not by confronting, but by absorbing. He sent Emiko back the next day. not with questions, but with supplies. Extra soy sauce, better napkins, a new gas line. No one understood why, but a week later, the stall owner started steering conversations away from business. "Don't know much about the neighborhood," he'd say. "Try the bento shop near the train tracks." The one, of course, run by one of Taro's longest clients. This was how Taro fought back, not with territory, with misdirection. By the spring, the newcomers had backed off. Maybe they sensed a wall. Maybe they simply grew bored. Or maybe they couldn't find anyone willing to talk. Taro never asked, because silence to him was the answer. During this time, he also experimented with something new: reverse debt. The concept was simple. Instead of lending money, he'd lend presence. For example, a struggling bookstore in Higashinari was on the verge of closing. The owner owed nothing, had never borrowed. But Junko liked the place, said the owner had a good eye for rare editions, so Taro intervened. He arranged for weekly visits, not from collectors, but from readers. Quiet clients who'd been encouraged to buy one book a week. No explanation. Just a line of mild-mannered men and women slowly reviving a dying business. Sales tripled. The owner, bewildered, tried to thank someone, but no one took credit. Eventually, he found a small origami umbrella in his cash register. He kept it, framed it, said it reminded him that kindness didn't always have a name. Taro watched this from afar, amused. "Sometimes," he said over tea, "the debt is yours. You owe the city not to disappear." Harada disagreed. He worried this made the operation too sentimental, too visible. "We used to collect because people feared us," he said. "Now they trust us. That's more dangerous." Taro nodded. Fear dies when the loudest man leaves the room. Trust lingers. Harada didn't argue again. Still, the team adjusted. They scaled back, removed 3 districts from their active routes, told long-standing clients to take a break. It confused people. It also made them want back in. Scarcity, once again, became Taro's greatest asset. Tonight, he walks through a narrow market street in Abeno. Most stalls are shuttered. A cat slips past his feet. The rain, light and cold, touches everything but him. He stops by a vending machine, pulls a hot milk tea from its glowing belly, and leans against the wall. Across the street, an old woman closes her shop front. She looks up, recognizes him. She bows, not out of fear, not out of debt, just memory, and Taro bows back, like a man who never left but was never really there to begin with. At some point, the city began to fold around him like origami, not in grand gestures or sweeping takeovers, but in the small, precise creases only he could feel. A regular customer stopped singing at a certain karaoke bar. A new coffee shop opened but never posted hours. A delivery truck turned left instead of right. All of it meant something to Taro. He walked Osaka not like a citizen, but like a cartographer of invisible boundaries, edges drawn not in concrete or zoning laws, but in favors, hesitations, and debt patterns. And while his network seemed to exhale with calm, a new element was forming, something slippery, something too clean. Digital money. Cash had always been the oxygen of Taro's operation, tangible, weighted, slow enough to control. But by 1998, prepaid cards were becoming popular. Point systems, store credits. Even local banks were experimenting with QR-coded microloans. The city's undercurrent was starting to speed up. At first, Taro ignored it. Let the world race. But then he noticed something strange. People were beginning to hide behind convenience. Clients who once bowed deeply and overpaid by a few hundred yen now shrugged when asked about delays. The app glitched. I thought it auto-paid. I lost my code. It wasn't just evasion, it was disconnection. Taro couldn't work with people who believed their debts weren't real. so he adjusted. Junko found the first solution: gift cards. They weren't traceable in the same way bank accounts were, and they retained the feel of currency. But more importantly, they could be distributed selectively. The network began offering small denominations as rewards. Why 1,000 cards to convenience stores, coffee shops, metro passes. Clients would receive them not as repayment, but as recognition. A thank you for staying on schedule, for keeping quiet, for tipping off a shift in a rival's behavior. And once clients got used to them, Taro started lending them. That was the pivot. Instead of cash, clients were offered gift cards. Subtle, polite, useful in daily life. And when repayment was due, they were expected to return double in face value, either in labor, favors, or equivalent cards. It blurred the lines between money and movement. Harada called it the polite racket, but Naoya noticed something else. The cards made people feel guiltier when they failed. "You're not just late on a loan," he said. "You're late returning a gift." It worked frighteningly well, but Taro was careful. For every 10 clients receiving digital goods, he made sure one still received something tactile: a handmade meal, a hand-folded note, a reminder that the system watched with warmth. Many people still think this balance between physical and digital, between gesture and ledger, was the key to Taro's resilience. While others chased efficiency, he chased weight. He wanted people to feel what they owed, not just count it. Around this time, he created his most curious ritual yet: the double knock. Collectors were instructed, for certain clients, to knock once, wait 10 seconds, then knock again. That was it. No follow-up, no demands. The message was, "We remember." The silence between knocks became louder than words. Clients hated it. One woman called Junko in tears after 3 such visits. "I know I'm late. Why don't they just ask?" Junko, sipping tea in the background of the call, simply said, "That was the asking." It became a psychological signature, a whisper in architectural form. Even competitors started copying it, badly. A rival loan group from Kobe tried using the same approach in 1999, but they paired the knock with yelling, with stomping, with confrontation. They missed the point. Taro's knock worked because it wasn't followed by noise. It was the empty hallway. The sense that someone had come, watched, judged, and walked away, taking part of your certainty with them. That same year, a client named Ayumu, a former vending machine technician, tried to fake a repayment. He delivered a sealed envelope with exact weight, correct markings, and even the same folding style as Taro's collectors used. But inside, useless point cards, all expired. The collector didn't open it, just bowed and left. 2 weeks later, Ayumu's apartment electricity was interrupted 3 times in a row. Then, his daughter's part-time job application at a karaoke chain mysteriously vanished from the system. His old vending supplier stopped taking calls. Finally, a knock. Once, 10 seconds, then again. Ayumu opened the door. No one there, but taped to his shoe rack, a card, blue umbrella, no message. He repaid the full debt the next day, with interest. The system never punished directly. It rearranged the air around you. Taro, meanwhile, was evolving further. He started working from what the team jokingly called the listening room, a spare 6-mat apartment above a tofu shop near Tamatsukuri. No furniture, save for a tatami mat, a notebook, and a transistor radio that stayed tuned to weather reports. He claimed it helped him think, that the barometric pressure affected debt flow. Junko rolled her eyes, but Naoya tracked the numbers. On rainy days, repayments surged. Coincidence? Maybe. But Taro believed in patterns more than principles. He also began asking for new data. "What are they afraid of this week?" he'd ask. And his collectors would answer, not with crimes or threats, but with fears. One man worried his daughter was skipping school. A woman feared her landlord had new buyers. A pachinko addict dreaded the construction site next door would shut down his regular escape. These weren't legal matters, but they were emotional debts. Taro called them pre-failures, the things people feared before they actually failed, and he began lending into those fears. He offered nothing on paper, just relief. A conversation, a delay, a knock with no request, and in return, loyalty that outlasted money. It said that by the end of 1999, Taro had fewer than 300 active loans, but every one of them came with a favor he could call in at any time, and he rarely had to ask twice. That's when he stopped carrying a phone, because if he needed you, you already knew. In a small neighborhood near Tennoji Station, there's a bento shop that never closes. It's narrow, tucked between a shuttered bookstore and a staircase that leads to nothing. The awning is faded, the sign unlit. But the rice is always hot. The tea is always warm. And if you pay attention, you'll notice one thing. Nobody ever says who owns it. That shop, though its legal documents say otherwise, belonged to Taro. Not in name, not in deed, but in pulse. It was his signal post, the barometer of the city's moods. Each receipt was a temperature reading. Each customer, a story wrapped in paper and soy. The staff rotated often, but the eyes behind the counter were always sharp. Most were former debtors, people who'd once missed a deadline and then somehow found themselves folding napkins, slicing pickled radish, and overhearing conversations that collectors would later recount in coded language. Junko called it the rain station, because everyone who ended up there came in soaked by something. By 2000, the shop had become more than just a kitchen. It was a feedback loop. Taro's version of a newspaper. The daily specials told him what was working. The late orders told him who was slipping. The regulars told him who couldn't bear to be unseen. But even rain stations can flood. That year, for the first time in nearly a decade, a client ran. His name was Koji, a mid-level coordinator in the bento supply chain. Trusted, discreet. He'd handled route timing, napkin counts, and quiet bonuses for particularly observant delivery staff. And then, one Thursday, he vanished. No warning, no complaints, just silence. His apartment was still paid up. His locker at the bento shop untouched. But the SIM card in his company-issued phone had been removed. The battery, gone. Taro was told within the hour. He didn't panic. Instead, he sat down and ordered a meal, ate slowly, drank tea, then asked, what was he carrying? Naoya replied, just the April rotation routes, and a few blank umbrella slips. Taro nodded. Then let's make May a ghost month, which meant stop collections, cancel drop-offs, cease deliveries in every area Koji had handled. Pull back and wait. It was the harshest reaction Taro had ever ordered, but it wasn't punishment. It was containment. Koji had taken something more dangerous than money, momentum. If he shared the route rhythms, the collection timing, the delivery patterns, it could unravel everything. For 30 days, Osaka went quiet. Clients noticed. The bentos stopped. The knocks never came. The silence that once comforted now clung like humidity. Some assumed the system had collapsed. Some hoped. But on the 1st of June, everything resumed, as if nothing had happened. And Koji? He returned. No fanfare. Just walked into the bento shop, bowed to Junko, and said, I was wrong. They say he was thinner, paler, spoke slower, like a man who'd stepped outside gravity for too long and struggled to come back. Taro didn't meet him personally, didn't ask for details, just had Junko reassign him, not to route coordination, but to receipt folding, a demotion on paper, but also a second chance. Koji never missed a day after that, and the network, stronger than ever. because the silence had proven itself. It had withstood betrayal, but Taro wasn't celebrating. He was studying, because while Koji returned, he didn't come alone. He came with new fears, strange behavior from certain clients, collectors reporting people watching them. Junko followed a hunch and traced the strange faces to a building near the Namba line. Inside, a shell company, empty desks, clean books, and a corkboard with one unsettling item, an umbrella card, pinned dead center. It was the first time anyone outside the system had gotten their hands on one. Taro called a meeting. The full core. Junko, Harada, Naoya, Koji. No assistants, no runners. They met not in the listening room, but in a bathhouse. Rented privately. Steam thick. Phones off. Taro didn't speak for 10 minutes. Then finally, "We've become too legible," Junko nodded. "They're not trying to stop us. They're trying to understand us." That to Taro was worse, because the system worked only so long as it remained unsolved. So he initiated the fold, a complete restructuring of routes, staff, methods. Bento deliveries were halved. Card symbols rotated monthly. Knock patterns reversed. Collectors received new names, some borrowed from poets, others from grocery stores long closed. It was like a magician changing hands mid-performance, not to trick, but to protect the illusion. And while the operation bent under the change, it never broke. Clients, if anything, became more compliant. The unpredictability sharpened their senses. The mystery was restored. Still, Taro didn't relax. He began writing again. Not notes, not ledgers, just reflections. On rice paper, each entry dated only by the weather. Junko found one once. It read, "Control isn't knowing where they are. It's knowing they believe you do." That was the last time anyone saw his handwriting. From that point forward, his instructions were spoken, carried mouth to mouth, memory to memory, like an old folk tale whispered between sleep and dream. Because the city may have been shifting, but Taro, he was dissolving, not dying, just becoming something more useful, an absence that shaped behavior. Osaka summers are relentless. The air doesn't just hang, it presses, sticking to your skin like a debt you forgot to repay. And in 2001, the heat settled in earlier than usual, as if the entire city had skipped spring. Vending machines sweated, tatami curled, tempers shortened. Taro, however, remained unchanged, still took the same morning train, still wore the same pale shirts with the sleeves precisely rolled, still walked as though time deferred to him. But something was shifting beneath the streets. The new developments in Umeda had brought more than just architecture. Foreign money was seeping in. Banks with English names, real estate funds without faces. These weren't the flashy criminals of the past. These were people who moved numbers, not weapons. Their silence wasn't earned. It was purchased. Junko brought him the news over barley tea. They're offering startup capital to bento routes. Taro blinked. What do they want in return? Visibility, she said. They're trying to buy the rhythm. Taro sipped. They're not just interested in the food, she continued. They want the data. He already knew. Clients were being approached, not by men in suits, but by delivery platforms promising easier lives. One-click loans, no face-to-face, no knock required. Some took the bait. The umbrella was being challenged by the algorithm. Taro responded not with confrontation, but with subtraction. He pulled routes, disbanded certain delivery points, released several collectors from service, not in punishment, but in gratitude. The system has outgrown some of its threads, he said quietly to Naoya, who was now operating as the system's cartographer in residence. Still, the threat was real. And so, for the first time, Taro broke a rule. He introduced paperwork. Not contracts, never contracts, but something closer to a confession. Clients who had been in the system more than 5 years were invited, never compelled, to write a letter. Not to Taro, but to themselves. A statement of what they'd borrowed, why they had borrowed it, and what they now understood. The letters weren't kept. They were read aloud once during tea, then burned. The act wasn't legal. It was spiritual, a purification rite for a machine made entirely of whispers. Junko, skeptical at first, eventually admitted the effect was profound. "Some of them wept," she said. Taro nodded. Then they finally understood, because understanding was always the point. Debt, in Taro's world, wasn't about money. It was about memory, about the weight of having been helped, seen, spared. And in return, he asked only that people remember who had done that for them. Many people still think the paperwork was symbolic, but some scholars years later would argue that the letter ritual marked the moment Taro began grooming successors, not individuals, mentalities, a way of thinking that could outlive him, because his presence was thinning. He no longer attended team meetings, no longer replied to questions directly. Instructions came filtered through Junko's tone, through Harada's nod, through small folded origami left on desks without explanation. Naoya built a chart of these symbols, each fold type, each crease, each paper color. Over time, a language emerged. Not just communication, navigation. If a client received a green crane, they were nearing Trust Tier 5. If a collector received a white triangle, it meant route shift in 48 hours. If a shopkeeper found a blue spiral in their rice delivery, it meant a potential betrayal within their staff. The system evolved into something resembling myth, and like all myths, it attracted pilgrims. Outsiders began seeking the umbrella system, hoping to borrow, to participate, to profit. But Taro had long since sealed the gates. No new entries, Junko declared at the start of 2002. The decision confused many. Weren't new borrowers essential? Weren't fresh debts the bloodstream of the body? But Taro's silence on the matter was his confirmation. He was turning the system inward, from expansion to reflection, from intake to preservation. And as with any organism preparing for dormancy, there were final tasks. One of them, the bento ledger. It wasn't a book, not in the literal sense, but a sequence. 23 handwritten entries delivered over 23 days, each to a different collector. Inside each, a client name, a memory, a repayment, and a request. Naoya received one that read, "Junpei, still ashamed of the crow. Send silence." Junko's read, "Okuda, still thinks we forgave the wrong brother. Let her believe it." These were closures, but not endings. Instructions not on how to collect, but how to complete. It was Taro's final reshuffling. And then for nearly a month, nothing. No word, no notes. Collectors waited. Clients noticed. Some speculated he had died. Others believed he'd left the country. But Junko, Harada, and Naoya knew better. Taro hadn't left. He'd simply finished. One day in late spring, the bento shop received a delivery. A sealed envelope. No stamp. No return address. Inside, a napkin, folded into a perfect umbrella. On it, 5 words, written in black ink. "The rain doesn't owe anyone." No signature. That week, the collectors began shifting into new roles. Quietly, respectfully. Some opened their own routes. Some disappeared into city bureaucracy. Some vanished altogether, leaving only folded shapes behind. But the clients? They kept paying, even with no one knocking, even with no one asking, because Taro had done what no system ever could. He'd made debt feel like dignity. And in Osaka, when the rain falls just right, some still pause before passing a vending machine. They check their pockets. Not for cash, not for phones, for a folded card, for a symbol, for a quiet voice that once said, "You owe nothing except memory." The absence was louder than expected. When June passed, and no new collectors stepped forward, when no one followed up on payments, when no notes arrived, and no umbrellas were found tucked between electric bills and rice deliveries, Osaka took a breath. But it wasn't relief. It was hesitation. There's a strange kind of silence that only exists after a rhythm stops. Clients still kept to their schedules. They left envelopes at the usual drop points. They cleaned storefronts earlier. They walked a bit straighter past vending machines. as if expecting someone to emerge from the mist with a folded slip in hand. But nothing came, and still they obeyed. Junko, meanwhile, had taken over the bento shop full-time. She insisted it wasn't permanent. "I'm just keeping the place warm," she'd say to anyone who asked, though few did. She changed nothing. Same recipes, same unlit sign, same quiet, steady presence behind the counter. The difference now was that she listened more. The clients who stopped in weren't asking for food. They were asking to be remembered. One night, a man who'd once borrowed wire worth 40,000 to cover a surgery for his cat left behind a paper envelope with no name, no note, just a single hand-drawn paw print and a photo of the cat, now clearly much older, curled up on a kotatsu. Junko tucked it behind the rice bin, next to a long-forgotten IOU written on the back of a shochu label. She didn't file it. She didn't return it. She just kept it. Harada, for his part, had started making trips to the coastal edges of Osaka Prefecture. He claimed it was for retirement research, but Junko knew better. He was watching the new developments, the suburban creep, the edge investors. He was making sure they didn't rewrite the map too quickly, because Taro's system, though invisible, still had fingerprints in the cement. Harada wasn't sentimental. He just understood weight, and he knew that when debts vanish too fast, something else fills the space, usually greed. So he walked neighborhoods with a clipboard he never wrote on, nodding at shopkeepers, buying train station sandwiches he never finished, and sometimes slipping coins into the hands of kids too young to know what a loan is, but smart enough to pocket quiet kindness. Naoya had moved into data work, but not for a company. He'd created his own sort of archive, part memory palace, part code base. He called it the echo table. Each entry was a pattern, not names, not dates, but behavioral loops. How many times someone paused before opening a door? How often someone apologized while repaying? How likely someone was to repay early when reminded on a rainy day? He wasn't tracking people. He was tracking rhythms, and every month he'd send Junko a one-line report. Things like, red umbrella types rising in Kita. 3 clients in Sumiyoshi are overdue emotionally but not financially. A new silence is forming near the old bathhouse route. She never asked how he calculated these things. She didn't need to, because Osaka still moved. Even with Taro gone, especially with Taro gone, one could say he'd designed his absence as carefully as his presence. Like the closing movement of a string quartet, the last note lingering longer than the sound itself. But some debts were never meant to be collected. Take the girl from Umeda, the one who'd once tried to scam the system with a forged card. She never paid it back, never confessed. But she changed jobs, left town, and 5 years later, returned. Quiet, older, walking straighter. She visited the bento shop without a word, ate everything, paid in cash. Left a folded umbrella next to her tray. It was green. The color Naoya once said meant regret repaid in full. Junko took it, unfolded it, then refolded it, this time in her own style. Tucked it under the counter. Said nothing, because that's what the system had always been about. Movement without instruction. Remorse without prompting. Resolution without applause. Many people still think that by 2003, the system was gone. But ask the delivery boy who took over Junko's bicycle route, and he'll tell you there's a man who calls twice a year, always orders 2 bentos, and always tells him, deliver one to the shrine by the canal, and don't look back. Ask the junior official in City Hall, who gets a postcard every March. No return address, only a photo of a vending machine in Shinsekai, and the words, you're being watched kindly. Ask the woman who found a note tucked inside her broken toaster after losing her job. It read, the rhythm hasn't forgotten you. Taro never said goodbye, because he didn't believe in exits. He believed in inertia, that if you press hard enough on one moment in time, it keeps echoing, quietly, gently, precisely, long after your footsteps fade. Tonight, Junko closes the shop later than usual, wipes the counter, straightens the stack of chopsticks, locks the door. On her walk home, she sees a man across the street, white shirt, no umbrella, standing under a vending machine's glow. She doesn't call out, she just bows. The man does the same, and then disappears into the mist of a city that never forgets what it owes, even if it no longer remembers the collector's name. The vending machines in Osaka are like sentinels, ever present, ever blinking, humming softly with secrets. They don't sleep. They don't flinch. And by 2004, many people began to whisper that Taro's final debt map was buried not in a ledger or archive, but in the machines themselves. It wasn't true, not exactly. But the myth persisted, because near every corner where something significant had once happened, a betrayal quietly forgiven, a loan repaid with tears, a silence left unpunished, there always seemed to be a vending machine. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe not. Naoya, of course, leaned into the theory. By then, he had transformed his echo table into a labyrinthine model, part digital, part memory, part superstition. He logged vending machine positions alongside repayment patterns, built rudimentary AI that pinged anomalies when machines in certain districts saw unusual spikes in hot beverage sales. Heat maps, he called them with a grin. Junko didn't need convincing. She'd long understood that Taro's brilliance wasn't in the structure itself, but in how it felt lived in. It didn't matter if the system was a bento shop, a folded napkin, or the placement of a drink dispenser. What mattered was that it never felt foreign. It felt like yours. And that's why people followed it. But the city was changing again, not gradually this time, violently. Urban projects moved fast, corporate fast. Entire rows of street vendors cleared overnight. Notices stapled in 4 languages. Buildings that once held decades of whispered obligations were flattened, dust rising like broken promises. Whole streets that had once pulsed with Taro's rhythm now beat to someone else's time. The knock and wait became swipe and forget. The umbrella card, now obsolete, was replaced by app notifications and canned reminders with expiry dates. And yet, some people still paused before entering a loan office, still asked quietly, "Does anyone here remember the schedule, man?" Most said no, a few said yes, and once in a while, a new employee would go digging, curious, and find a blue paper umbrella pinned to a bulletin board with no label, no explanation, just folded perfectly, corners crisp. That's how Taro survived, not through presence but echo. Meanwhile, Harada had gone mostly silent. He no longer sent updates. No more tracking market movement. No more footbridge observations. Until one morning in early summer, Junko received a box. Inside, a notebook. Handwritten. Careful, measured strokes. Not Taro's writing. Harada's. She recognized the way he wrote his 7s, how he always double-lined his K. It wasn't labeled, just titled, "What's Left Uncollected." Inside were stories, not reports. Stories of clients who had moved away, who had changed names, who had overpaid or vanished mid-cycle, who had once cried while slicing radish, or begged for a second chance and never used it. Each entry ended with a single word. Settled, there were 112 entries. Junko read each one. Some she remembered, some she didn't. At the end of the notebook, one page was folded. Inside it read, "For when the umbrella closes." It was signed only with a drawing, not a name, just the faint outline of a bento box. Closed. That evening, she walked to the canal near Suminoi, the one with the stone path and the rusted iron rail. She sat down, waited. No plan. And just as the sun dipped behind a warehouse roof, someone sat beside her. Didn't speak, didn't look, but placed a single folded umbrella between them. White paper, clean, unmarked, then left. She didn't follow. She didn't need to, because that too was part of the system, the handing off of the rhythm, not the business, not the network. The rhythm, the quiet understanding that people still owed something, even if the one they owed had disappeared. And so the new era began, quietly, with folded paper, with ghost maps, with vending machines that people swore gave the right drink when you whispered the right word, even if no one else heard. The next generation didn't know Taro's name, but they knew the knock, the silence between the knock, the weight of the second knock, the way it made your stomach shift. Because some things once learned never unlearn themselves, and in Osaka, debts are no longer tallied, they are felt. Taro taught the city to remember what it once forgot, that the smallest kindness, the softest warning, the briefest pause in a hallway could mean someone is still watching, still waiting, still caring, just not asking anymore. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is, "You already know what I came for." There are cities that forget, cities that pave over their ghosts with glass and steel, that drown old stories beneath new jingles, cafes and convenience. But Osaka stores, not in books, not in museums, but in gestures, in the way someone bows slightly deeper than necessary, in the choice to leave a coin tray at a shop counter even after going fully cashless, in the glance exchanged before a request is made. It's in that layered, invisible memory that Taro's legacy lived on. By the middle of 2005, 5 years since his last direct order, the umbrella system still existed, not as a hierarchy, but as habits. Collectors no longer called themselves that. Some worked in city transit, some in delivery services, others as night shift clerks. But they all recognized each other, in the same way animals recognize scent, and they still followed the rhythm, not out of obligation, but because they had internalized it. Junko, ever precise, had documented the names of every client who had voluntarily repaid more than they owed. There were 742 of them. She called them echoes. Many were unaware of each other. Some had moved away. Others had changed careers, families, even countries. But Junko kept track, not through technology, but by mail. Once a year, she sent each of them a handwritten postcard. A single sentence, no signature. Messages like, "It rained today. Thought of your door. You once overpaid by Y 300, we noticed. Your silence in 98 still echoes kindly." No one ever replied, but no cards were returned. Harada, meanwhile, had taken on the role of cartographer. Wasn't quite the word anymore. Tuner, maybe. He walked the city with no destination, adjusting small things, chatting up a shop owner who looked too tired, leaving behind a fresh box of tissues at a cleaning crew's station, or simply recommending someone change their light bulb before it flickered out. He had become the system's mechanic, not of gears, but of atmosphere. "Do you feel it?" he asked Naoya once, as they sat beneath the awning of a shuttered DVD rental shop. Naoya looked up from his notepad. "Feel what?" "That moment," Harada said, "when someone's about to ask for help, but doesn't." Naoya nodded. "That's where the work is." Because the work now wasn't about loans, or debts, or repayments. It was about pressure. Measured, gentle, purposeful. The same kind of pressure Taro had always applied. The kind that turned hesitation into clarity, pride into humility, and desperation into movement. And movement had returned, in new forms. In Higashisumiyoshi, a quiet woman named Midori began folding paper umbrellas and leaving them in coin lockers. Not every locker, just the ones with expired rental receipts and no recent claims. Inside each umbrella, she wrote, "You still matter. Just come home." She didn't work for Junko or Harada. She didn't even know their names. She was a former client, of the original system. And she'd once said during a repayment tea in 1996, "This debt feels more like gravity than weight." That gravity was still pulling. One night, a young man in a convenience store found a folded umbrella tucked inside a snack shelf. No note, no number, just the symbol. He showed it to his father, who used to run a pawn shop near Kujo. The father stared at the umbrella a long time, then said, "Put it back. Let someone else find it." Because it was never about finding Taro. It was about finding your place in the balance. The city had absorbed his method. It whispered through utility corridors and backroom meal prep tables. It pulsed in the logic of who got promoted and who got quietly redirected. And though no one officially used the term anymore, everyone understood the rules. Never offer more than someone can carry. Always allow dignity to repay first. Leave a mark that fades at the perfect speed. Many people still think Taro died quietly in some back alley, or disappeared into a temple, or reinvented himself as a monk in Fukuoka. Others believe he never existed, that he was a cover story for a collective effort. But Junko, Harada, and Naoya, when they rarely meet, never speak his name aloud. They just sit, drink tea, and wait, because somewhere out there, another silence is forming. Another rhythm is beginning to hum, and if it's anything like the last one, it will begin not with thunder, but with a knock, then 10 seconds, then another, and maybe, just maybe, a warm bento left on the doorstep. No note, just wait. Measured. The night Harada died, there was no announcement, no obituary, no funeral procession, not even a whisper among the few who still moved in the system's wake. He passed quietly in a rented room above a newspaper print shop. No television, no calendar on the wall, just a shelf of old ramen bowls and a folded umbrella resting beside a transistor radio still tuned to the weather. Junko heard about it 3 days later, from a delivery boy who remembered Harada's exact tea order and noticed the silence before anyone else did. She didn't cry. She just boiled water, steeped a cup of barley tea, and left it on the edge of the bento counter for 10 minutes, untouched, then poured it out slowly, like tipping memories back into the earth. Naoya arrived that evening. No message sent, no meeting arranged. He simply showed up, rain clinging to his coat like ash, and took a seat near the counter's edge. The bento shop stayed closed that night. Lights off, curtains drawn. But the two of them sat in silence, listening to the rain, just like Taro used to do when the city was humming louder than he liked. He would have hated ceremony, Naoya said eventually. Junko nodded, but he built one anyway, and it was true. Harada's life had become its own quiet ritual. He was never loud, never praised, but his presence had become foundational, like the way you trust your feet to find the ground even in the dark. And now that he was gone, something in the city's gravity shifted. The next morning, Junko reopened the shop. Nothing changed, but everything felt different. The first customer of the day, a young man in an office shirt still wrinkled from sleep, ordered a standard meal, then paused, as if unsure what to say. Junko offered him tea. He accepted, then quietly, "Did the man who usually checks the umbrellas move?" Junko didn't ask how he knew. She just smiled and said, "He's on a long route." That became the official phrasing. Harada wasn't gone. He was on a long route. It was more than kindness. It was continuity. Because that was the thing about the system. It was never allowed to end. It could fade. It could shift. But it couldn't stop. And so it didn't. Instead, it adapted. Naoya began digitizing what little was left. Not names or debts, but gestures. He created a private software, shared only between 6 trusted former collectors. It wasn't flashy, just a directory of folded symbols, timestamps, behavioral tags. He called it kasa, Japanese for umbrella. Each entry was paired with a tone. Yes, a musical note, based on the emotion associated with the interaction. Remorse, resolve, fear, gratitude, deception. It formed its own rhythm, its own music, inaudible to all but the system's remaining pulse keepers. Some nights, Junko would log in and just listen to the hum, like rain on a tin roof, like memory. Meanwhile, out in the districts where the system had long gone dormant, something strange began happening. People started returning the old cards, blue umbrellas, black squares, even the rare green folds. No one told them to. They simply arrived. Sometimes slipped under the door of the bento shop, sometimes left at bus stops, once folded into the collar of a used suit at a thrift store. Each time Junko found one, she logged the location and date. She didn't call it closure. She called it settlement without weight. Many people still think Taro's greatest legacy was the way he shaped Osaka, but those closest to him knew the deeper truth. It wasn't the city he molded. It was the air between people, that subtle, charged pause before an offer, the gravity in a gift with no strings, the way people, once they'd been seen properly, couldn't go back to being invisible. And now, that awareness, though diluted, still moved like mist through back alleys and cracked shutters. Tonight, Junko walks the old route near Shinsekai, not to collect, just to walk. She passes by a vending machine, the kind with the old-style plastic buttons and the faint hum of age. At its base is a folded umbrella, made of silver foil. Not system-issued, not official, but careful, crisp. She doesn't pick it up. She just bows slightly and keeps walking. And back in the bento shop, a new girl, the first staff Junko has hired in years, preps tomorrow's rice. She doesn't know the full story. She doesn't have to. But when she sees a customer hesitate too long at the counter, she offers them a warm drink, a folded napkin, and a smile that waits patiently. Because somewhere deep inside her she understands. The knock still happens. You just can't always hear it. At the far edge of Osaka, where the city surrenders to rice paddies and silence, there's a train station few people use after dark. One platform, one ticket machine, a wooden bench worn down by time and damp with memory. And on that bench, once every 3 months, someone leaves a folded note. Always the same paper, beige, thick, creased by hand. The note is never addressed. It contains a name, a date, and a single sentence. No return address, no threats, no contact information. But every name on those notes belonged at some point to someone in the umbrella system. Junko found the first one by accident. She was following up on a client who had dropped off the radar, a barber who had once repaid with shiso leaves and soba coupons instead of yen. She stopped at the station to rest, sat down, and found the note tucked between the slats of the bench. It said, "Yamada-san made good in Kyoto, 2006. She didn't need to ask who sent it, because only one person had ever used that exact phrasing. Made good. Taro, or someone moving exactly like him. That small, recurring gesture became known among the few remaining as the ledger bench. Every quarter, someone checked it. Sometimes it was Junko, sometimes Naoya. Once, a former collector who now ran a flower stall in Namba took the train out just to sit in silence. He said later, it smelled like resolution, but not every note was peaceful. One read, Takigawa failed again. Last payment dishonored. Another, Saito-san betrayed a silence. Remove recognition. Junko never reacted publicly. She logged each one, folded the notes 3 times, and placed them in a lacquered box behind the shop, beside the broken rice cooker no one ever fixed. The one Taro had once used as an impromptu tea shelf. The notes weren't instructions. They were continuations, signs that someone, somewhere, still carried the map, still kept the pulse steady, still monitored the emotional currency of a city that had long since stopped pretending it owed anyone anything. But Taro's system never cared about pretense. It cared about balance, and that balance began to shift again in 2007, when Junko noticed something strange. More people were leaving offerings, not to shrines, to corners. A pair of students began folding umbrellas and placing them beneath vending machines. One blue, one green, every week. When asked why, they shrugged. It's just something our uncle used to do. A retired bus driver started leaving small wrapped rice balls on benches with a post-it that read, "For someone trying." A cafe owner built a display of lost items, not for retrieval, but tribute, each labeled with phrases like, "This wallet was returned with nothing missing." She cried before paying. We remembered. None of these people were officially in the system. Some hadn't even heard of Taro, but they were acting within it, as if the city, long after its mechanics stopped turning, had begun carrying the rhythm like muscle memory. Small gestures, kind, precise corrections, a culture of correction without confrontation. Naoya tracked it. Of course he did. By now, he'd turned his casa system into an art piece, a sculpture made of old umbrellas, bent train passes, expired meal cards, and receipts folded into shapes only he understood. He called it the absence that moves us. It sat in the window of a forgotten library in Sumiyoshi. Visitors didn't understand it. They didn't need to, but one day a girl left a note beneath it. "He helped my father, I think. No proof, just balance." Junko read the note while eating onigiri in silence. She didn't cry, but she finally admitted something to herself. Taro had been right to disappear, because disappearance is not erasure. It is graduation. The rhythm had outgrown the composer. Even the collectors, what few remained, no longer used the old terms. They called themselves adjusters now, or more often, nothing at all. They just showed up, left messages in umbrellas on benches, paid off someone's overdue library fine without explanation, guided a lost child back to her mother with no exchange of names, not because they were told to, but because they remembered how. And in that memory, Osaka didn't just preserve its past, it renewed its contract, the one that said, "We owe each other more than money. We owe understanding. We owe pause. We owe the second knock." And somewhere, maybe in a quiet town past Nara, or on the edge of a pier near Wakayama, a man in a pressed shirt still walks with soft soles and watches vending machines flicker in the dusk. He doesn't intervene. He doesn't need to, because his echo has weight, and his weight still moves people. In every city, there are places where the story leaks through the cracks. For Osaka, one of those places is a dilapidated record store just off the back streets of Nipponbashi. No online presence, no signage, just a wooden A-frame that reads, "Only songs that remember." The owner is a gaunt man in his 60s with wrists like willow branches and an encyclopedic memory of vinyl grooves. His name is Mamoru, and while he claims no affiliation with anyone or anything, he also keeps a box of folded umbrellas behind the counter, all blue, all pristine. People don't ask about them, not more than once, because if you linger too long, Mamoru starts speaking in patterns. He'll say things like, "You know, some notes are only meant to be played once." The difference between a beat and a debt is just intention, and if you try to push, he changes the music. Something older, something with an echo so long, it feels like you've heard it in a dream. Naoya was the first to find the shop. He came in looking for a rare Enka pressing, but stayed because Mamoru placed his teacup on the counter with a folded napkin beneath, creased perfectly, in the same style Taro used to favor when leaving tips. It wasn't proof. It didn't need to be. That shop, like others across Osaka, had become part of what Junko began calling the drift. The drift wasn't a network, not in the formal sense. It had no hierarchy, no collectors, no active bookkeeping. It was a phenomenon. Places where the philosophy of the umbrella system persisted, not by design, but through osmosis. A locksmith in Johto who offers one free repair each week, but only for people who don't ask. A taxi driver in Chuo Ward who waives fares for riders who say, "I'm having a rough night," but never speaks of it again. A vending machine in Abeno that, once a month, dispenses an extra drink to someone who inserts a 100 coin with a paper umbrella etched faintly on its edge. These are not legends. These are observations. Naoya keeps a wall-sized map now, not of streets, but of behavior, noting where small, untraceable acts of grace repeat. He doesn't try to control it. He doesn't understand all of it, but he records it, because someone has to remember the shape of the echo. Junko, on the other hand, has stepped further back. The bento shop runs without her now. A girl named Emiko, once a bento recipient herself, now runs the kitchen with clean hands and quiet eyes. She still folds the napkins diagonally, still warms the miso before the rice, but she adds a small flower on every tray, a change that Junko approves of silently, because the system was never meant to be a museum. It was meant to move. Every now and then, Junko still walks the old collector paths, and on one such walk, near a footbridge in Tsuruhashi, she finds a man sitting alone with a small radio. He's humming along to a melody that's been out of print since the 80s. He sees her, smiles, then says without turning, "He forgave me once. I never knew why. I was sure he'd come for me." Junko doesn't respond, just stands beside him for a while, then gently, "Maybe that was the repayment." He nods, eyes misting. "I've never borrowed since." "Then you did pay." They part without names, because the work no longer needs identity. It needs continuity. And Osaka continues, even in neighborhoods reshaped by tourism, even as digital payment replaces paper, even as language becomes more casual, more screen-bound, less folded, the philosophy persists. In the pause before someone gives up, in the stranger who leaves the umbrella just in case, in the employer who forgives a second mistake, quietly, without comment. That's where the system lives now. Many people still think the umbrella operation was dismantled by time. But here's the truth. It wrote itself into the weather, and the weather is everywhere. So tonight, a man pays for a stranger's train ticket, says nothing, and walks away. A woman leaves a letter at a shrine, not asking for anything, just explaining that she's sorry. A child gives his unopened drink to a man asleep on a bench, then walks away before he wakes. These aren't news stories. These are not viral posts. These are the rhythm continuing. Taro didn't build a syndicate. He built a reflex. And now, the city twitches with it, even when no one's watching, even when the bench is empty, even when the knock doesn't come. Especially then, every echo, no matter how soft, eventually finds a wall to bounce off. In late 2007, something unusual happened. An intern at a mid-sized Osaka tech firm published a blog post. The piece wasn't remarkable, just a casual essay about how his grandfather used to talk about a debt system that didn't use numbers. He described things like folded paper umbrellas and bento meals that showed up after apologies. He didn't name names. He didn't even think it was true. But the post caught attention. People shared it, commented. Some said, "My uncle said something similar." Others claimed, "That was just a myth, right?" A few asked, "Where can I get one of those bento deliveries?" The internet did what it always does, turn folklore into curiosity, and curiosity into noise. For a while, nothing came of it, until a woman in Kyoto claimed she'd once had a debt erased after crying on a sidewalk. She posted a photo, a wrinkled, blue origami umbrella she'd kept in a shoebox since 1998. It had no signature, but written on it was a single line, "Keep going even when you're done." The photo went viral. Within weeks, umbrella debt became a buzzword. People started leaving folded shapes in bars, on train seats, in bookstores. Most meant nothing. A few were part of an odd art movement. Some turned it into a scavenger hunt, but in the middle of it all, something real began to stir. A journalist, not flashy, not exploitative, tracked down Mamoru, the record store owner, asked about the umbrellas behind his counter. Mamoru simply said, "There are only two kinds of people in this city, those who owe and those who remember." That quote became a meme. But for Junko, it felt like a warning, because the system had always survived by not being visible, not being named. Now it was trending. That same week, a customer left a handwritten note in Junko's shop. Just a few words. If this becomes a brand, it dies. No signature. But she knew who it was. Taro? Possibly. Or someone following closely enough to remember how he thought. She called a quiet meeting with Naoya. They sat in the back of the shop, behind a curtain of steam and miso, and reviewed the trajectory of the drift. "It's spreading," Naoya said, not sounding pleased. "It's not ours anymore," Junko replied. "But they're folding wrong. Too loose. They're writing poems on the paper," she smirked. Taro wrote poems too. They just had consequences. They didn't stop the drift. They knew better. Trying to cage an echo only makes it louder. Instead, they introduced corrections. Not censorship, just nudges. Collectors, retired but alert, began placing folded shapes alongside the fake ones. No explanation. Just more precise, more careful, weighted with intention. On one train, a girl found 2 umbrellas side by side. One sloppy and new, scrawled with, "You got this." The other, older, cleaner, marked only with a dot. She chose to keep the second. Naoya called it shadow mentoring, correcting the culture without claiming it, and it worked for a while. The drift settled. The trend slowed. Those who didn't understand it moved on, but something had shifted in the city. The umbrella was no longer just a mark of the old debt system. It had become comforting. Hospitals began receiving anonymous donations wrapped in folded blue paper. Teachers reported students quietly leaving notes of apology with umbrella stamps. A ramen shop in Fukushima Ward announced they'd serve anyone for free, just once, if they brought in an origami umbrella with no writing on it. They called it a bowl for what you owe yourself. Junko let it happen, because control was never the goal. Continuity was, and the city was continuing. It wasn't Taro's Osaka anymore, not fully, but it carried his fingerprints in its posture, the way people paused before finishing a sentence, the silence they left between an apology and an explanation. The second knock. One night, Junko walked to the vending machine near the river, the same one where Taro used to lean, watching the world hum around him. She found a child there, alone, no more than 9. He held an umbrella in his lap, folded, flawed, but sincere. She sat beside him. "You lost something?" she asked. He shook his head. "Someone." Junko looked at the umbrella. "You made that?" He nodded. "What's it for?" He paused. "Just to say I'm trying." She didn't reply, just reached into her coat pocket and handed him another. Blue. Crisp. Perfectly creased. He didn't take it. He just stared. "Which one's better?" he asked. Junko smiled. "The one you leave behind." She stood, walked away, and behind her, a new weight settled on the bench. Familiar, measured, and entirely earned. By the end of 2008, the umbrellas had gone global. Not the system, not the structure, not the rhythm, but the gesture. A folded blue slip was spotted in Berlin, slipped between the pages of a loan agreement at a community bank. Another surfaced in Buenos Aires, placed beside a bowl of free food left on a stoop. A photographer in Seoul captured an umbrella symbol scribbled on a subway wall with the words, "Wait, someone remembers." Junko didn't know how to feel about it. It was flattering, sure, poetic even, but also dangerous, because symbols can spread faster than meaning. She and Naoya met at the old train station, the ledger bench, now moss-lined and forgotten by everyone except the rhythm keepers. "Do you think this is what he wanted?" Naoya asked, holding a sheaf of printed emails. Messages from strangers claiming to continue the tradition. Junko took the pages, didn't look at them, just folded them twice and let the wind carry them down the tracks. "No," she said. "He never wanted a tradition. He wanted a system that knew when to stop." Naoya frowned. "So we stop?" Junko didn't answer, because by then it was clear they couldn't. They weren't in control anymore. The idea had outgrown its origin. But even in expansion, there was still responsibility. So they shifted focus from guarding to guiding. They created something new. The Manual of Soft Weight. It wasn't a book. It was an oral ledger, shared in person, always at dusk, always between only two people. No recordings, no duplication. The manual wasn't about the past. It was a teaching. How to nudge without damage, how to help without expectation, how to remind without shame. Each chapter was only a sentence. Things like, do not collect what you wouldn't give away. They're not late, they're afraid. Silence is a receipt if you fold it right. The first student was a street cleaner named Koda. He asked too many questions at first, wanted rules, wanted definitions. Junko told him to spend a week sweeping without earbuds, just listening to what people weren't saying. He came back changed. The next was a tattoo artist named Rena, who had once borrowed from the old umbrella system in her 20s and repaid in handmade flyers posted across vending machines, all with the words, "You're seen." Each new student wasn't told what to do. They were simply told, "There's a rhythm. Don't step on it." Meanwhile, Naoya created false positives. He would leave poorly folded umbrellas in strategic places, off rhythm, off tone, just to see who corrected them. He wasn't being cruel. He was measuring sensitivity. And in one cafe in Morinomiya, he watched as a young barista spotted a crumpled attempt beside the sugar packets, studied it for a moment, then quietly refolded it and placed it beside the register with a small note. "Try again when you're ready." Naoya smiled, logged the moment. That barista became student 3. The system had evolved again. It wasn't a hierarchy anymore, or even a shadow operation. It had become a school of breath, a language spoken in absence. But even still, even in its gentlest form, there were boundaries, and those who crossed them were noticed. A startup in Tokyo tried to commercialize the umbrella symbol. T-shirts, mugs, a campaign about soft debt that co-opted the language of pause and dignity and folded it into slogans. Junko didn't respond directly. She sent an envelope. No return address, no threats. Inside, a napkin folded perfectly. On it, written in faint ink, "You've misread the silence." The campaign was gone within a week. No press release, no apology, just erasure. Because Taro's rhythm had no room for branding, only recognition, and it remained strongest where no one tried to claim it. Like in an alley near the old Kuruman market, where a violinist plays the same tune every Thursday at dusk. She never takes tips, but beside her case is always a folded note. They change every week. "You're not late." "He never forgot your last payment." This song was once used to say goodbye. Junko has never spoken to her, never needed to. Some debts once acknowledged become echoes, and echoes once folded become guides. That's what the system had become now. Not a path, but a wayfinder. Not rules, but reminders. That what we owe each other is rarely transactional. It's the second knock, the pause between questions, the choice to fold rather than speak. And so, in a shop that still makes bentos at dawn, and in a city that still stops for strangers who look like they forgot something, the rhythm hums. Not because Taro demands it, but because the city remembers the weight of being seen, and carries that weight quietly, together. Still, the city moved into 2009 with new lights, new sidewalks, and a sense that something big was coming, even if no one could name it. The old storefronts were gone, replaced by smooth glass and menu boards that flipped with the touch of a finger. Young voices filled the air, louder than before, lighter too. Osaka was moving faster, cleaner, brighter. But if you listened hard, beneath the construction drills, behind the delivery scooters, through the automatic doors, you could still hear it. The rhythm, fainter now, but steady. It lived in the corners, in the hesitation of a loan officer who decided not to call in a debt that day, in the way a clerk wrote "paid in full" on a receipt, even though the customer was short Y100, because she recognized the trembling hand, in the woman who swept her stoop each morning and always left a second broom leaning against the wall. just in case. The umbrella system no longer required structure. It had become a culture, and as with all cultures, there were children. Not of blood, but of rhythm. They didn't fold cards. They didn't know tarot. They had never heard 2 knocks with 10 seconds between, but they had inherited the feeling. They had grown up watching parents cook extra rice for someone just in case. They had seen neighbors pool coins silently for school fees. No ceremony, just nods. They had absorbed a way of moving, a kindness that didn't need to explain itself. Naoya noticed it most in places he didn't expect, like in a nail salon where a receptionist paused after every conversation and wrote something down. Not about the client's nails, but their mood. Tanaka-san seemed tired today. Offer warm tea next time, or in a delivery man who left tape and scissors behind with a package, just in case the elderly woman couldn't open it herself. Naoya stopped logging such moments. There were too many. Instead, he began building absence maps, places where the rhythm wasn't, where silence didn't hum, but ache. He marked buildings that had changed ownership too quickly, streets where people walked faster, eyes down, offices where smiles ended too soon. And into those gaps, he began to drop folded notes. Not umbrellas, not now. He folded them into question marks. No writing, just a shape that begged, "Are you paying attention?" The results were mixed. Some were ignored, some thrown away, some, oddly, returned, with additions. One was unfolded, refolded into a star, and left in a ramen shop with the words, "We're trying." Junko kept that one, framed it, because that's what mattered now. Not replication, not control, just the reminder that there was still something worth preserving, not as a structure, but as a decision people make, quietly, every day. And even though the old symbols faded, their lessons remained. Give gently, collect softly, forgive without receipt, watch without owning. One day a woman arrived at the bento shop, mid-30s, wet from rain, not dressed for ceremony. She asked for Junko, didn't give her name, just pulled a folded envelope from her bag. Inside, a receipt from 1997, a bento payment, extra soy sauce, and a name scrawled on the back in pencil, Kubo. Still waiting, Junko took it, sat her down, made tea. "No one asked you to bring this," she said gently. "I know," the woman replied. "Then why?" "Because I think he forgave me, and I didn't get to return that." Junko didn't press further, just served her the house special, extra pickled plum. At the end of the meal, the woman left quietly. Under her tray, she'd placed a new receipt, blank, signed only, still paying it forward. That night, Junko wrote in her notebook, not the old ledger, but the small blue one she kept for herself. Some debts grow interest in grace. And beside it, she drew a new fold, a shape that wasn't quite an umbrella. Not a bird, not a star, just a motion, a crease, the beginning of a new symbol, because the story wasn't done. Not yet. It had turned a corner. And while tarot might never return, and perhaps shouldn't, his method had outlived him, not as law, but as instinct. A city that remembers how to pause, a city that notices when someone's missing, a city that, when the moment is right, folds a small piece of paper with care and leaves it behind for the next person to find. By the time 2010 rolled in, Tarot's name had faded from conversation, not out of disrespect, but out of reverence, like a retired tune, too powerful to hum casually, too precise to remix. In the circles where the rhythm still echoed, he became the absent origin, not gone, not denied, just respectfully unspoken. Junko had stopped expecting signs from him. She had come to accept that some disappearances were permanent, not out of failure, but fulfillment. Taro had never been the type to stay for applause. He left when the echo was strong enough to carry without him. Still, when the letter came, she knew it was his. It arrived in a plain envelope with no return address. The handwriting was unmistakable. Thin, slanted, careful. Inside a single page. If they're folding without us, it means we did it right. Don't trace it. Don't teach it. Just correct it gently when it forgets how to land. You were always better at the endings than me. T. She didn't cry, but she closed the shop early that day and walked to the waterfront, the same spot where Taro had once stood, arms crossed, watching the tide roll in like a debt he already understood. The water was still, the sky soft. Somewhere far away, a ship horn sighed like it remembered something it wasn't supposed to. Junko stayed there for hours, not to mourn, to calibrate, because the work wasn't about sentiment. It was about balance, and balance, by its nature, requires updates. So she returned to the city with renewed clarity and began to do what Taro had always hoped someone would do. She let it evolve. The first change was subtle. At the bento shop, Junko introduced a silent meal option. No spoken interaction, just a nod and a tray. It wasn't advertised. It was for those whose shame still shouted too loudly inside them. Then came the echo drops. Small cards left anonymously in public spaces, each with a sentence designed to land like a blanket over sharp corners. You were heard. The second attempt counts more. Pause, then try again. These cards weren't tracked. They weren't part of a system. They were simply corrections for the soul. Naoya, meanwhile, shifted from watching to listening. He spent days in places where voices overlapped, train stations, markets, bars, and documented the moments people didn't realize they were soft, like the way two salarymen clinked cans without looking at each other, or how a teenager straightened an old woman's grocery bag handles before handing it back, or the barista who added one extra sugar packet without asking because you looked like you needed a sweeter morning. These weren't gestures from the system. They were gestures of the system, and that was the point. The system had leaked out of its old shell, no longer bound by collectors or bento slips or umbrella shapes. Now it hovered. It moved through public parks where people replaced broken swings without being asked. It echoed in notes scrawled on restroom walls that said, "You're not alone, even now." It trembled in the pause someone gave before honking their horn. Osaka, without ever agreeing to it, had begun to carry the rhythm the way lungs carry breath. Automatically, unconsciously, reliably. But even so, even then, some shadows returned. In the spring of 2010, a group began calling themselves the Folded Order. Young, earnest, too precise, too loud. They wore pins of blue umbrellas and handed out pamphlets with distorted versions of Taro's philosophies. They spoke of debt forgiveness as revolution and emotional exchange as a new economy. Junko watched one of their street rallies from a distance. The energy was impressive, but the tone, wrong. They were converting rhythm into ideology. And ideology, unlike rhythm, doesn't bend. It snaps. She didn't confront them. But that night, in every cafe they had passed, Junko left a small note on each table. If you need to explain the rhythm, you've already broken it. The Folded Order fizzled within months. Too rigid, too reactive. They hadn't understood that the power wasn't in shouting the silence. It was in offering it. And the city, wise in ways it didn't even know, moved back to its quiet hum. Junko returned to the shop. She greeted regulars with less curiosity and more comfort. They didn't need her to be a gatekeeper, just a reminder. And in the stillness of evening, while slicing ginger for the next day's meals, she would sometimes fold an old receipt, not always into an umbrella, sometimes into a bird, sometimes just into a crease with no shape at all, because sometimes the point wasn't the fold, it was the intention behind it. By 2011, the fold had become folklore, no longer whispered among debtors or passed silently from collector to collector. It had slipped into childhood stories, background dialogue in TV dramas, and the occasional urban legend told by high schoolers walking home after cram school. They say if you fold a paper umbrella just right and leave it on your windowsill, someone will forgive your worst mistake. Of course, most people didn't believe it, but they believed in what it felt like. Because in a city like Osaka, the rhythm didn't need belief to survive. It only needed repetition. The echo had become instinct. And instinct, as Junko often reminded herself, doesn't require approval. One of her new regulars was a woman in her 20s named Mariko. She came every Thursday, always the same seat, always paid an exact change, folded into a neat triangle. Junko noticed, of course, but said nothing, until one evening, Mariko lingered after the last bowl was cleared. She tapped her receipt on the table. "This place," she said quietly. "It doesn't fix anything, but it slows the damage." Junko gave a small nod. "That's all we were ever trying to do." Mariko stared at her, puzzled. "We?" But Junko didn't answer. Some names weren't meant to echo forever. Out in the city, more subtle shifts were surfacing. In a government building, a clerk began quietly writing kind notes on overdue tax notices. "We know it's been hard. You're not alone." She was never reprimanded. In a hospital, a nurse began leaving folded birds beside sleeping patients who had no visitors. She claimed she didn't know how to fold umbrellas, but somehow, her birds brought the same comfort. In a high-rise office, a junior analyst, burnt out, overlooked, once found a sticky note on her screen. "You don't need to outrun the fear, just walk with it." She never discovered who left it. No one did, because the system was no longer operated. It was lived. The old language of folded paper and two-knot codes had been replaced with an emotional shorthand. Half glances, soft corrections, unspoken pauses. And in that new language, the city began to speak fluently. Naoya started a new project, his last perhaps. He called it the Folding Archive. It wasn't a digital platform or a ledger. It was a mural, one long wall in an abandoned train tunnel, painted entirely in subtle layered creases. No figures, no faces, just folds, shadows, and overlapping shapes. He painted by candlelight, one section at a time, never rushed, never publicized. When asked what it meant, he replied, "It's not a message, it's a rhythm you look at." People visited it anyway. Some left notes tucked in the cracks. Others just stood quietly, as if listening for something behind the wall. And always, without fail, someone cried. Junko visited once. She didn't leave anything, just brushed her fingers along the folds and whispered, "You were right to disappear." Tarot had become a ghost story, a parable, a punchline in old bar rooms. But those who had felt the weight knew better. He was the first breath of a movement that refused to name itself. Because once you name a silence, you limit it. And the umbrella system had never been about limits. It was about the stretch, the grace between cause and consequence, the pause before the harshness, the chance to pay without being asked, to forgive without demand, to see without proof. Now the rhythm traveled in ways even Junko hadn't anticipated. In architecture, doors that closed more softly. In product design, bento boxes with compartments labeled shareable. In language, phrases like folded apology and umbrella timing began slipping into casual conversation. Most people didn't know where it came from. They didn't need to, because some systems don't survive by being remembered. They survive by being repeated. And in the warmth of a city that still remembers how to listen before reacting, to fold before accusing, to nod before explaining, Tarot's rhythm hums on, not loudly, not always clearly, but without interruption. It was a Tuesday in late November. Cool air, clean skies, a kind of hush that makes a city feel suspended. The kind of day when the past doesn't knock. It slips in through a back door, settles beside you, and waits. Junko arrived early to the shop. The rice hadn't even soaked yet. She flipped the sign to closed anyway. Not because she was closed, but because sometimes people need to know they're entering something slower. She lit the stove, sliced burdock root, and let the silence build like steam in the kitchen. Then the door opened. Not a knock, not a pause, just entry. The man who stepped in wasn't Taro. Too tall, too rigid. His shoes were wrong. Expensive in a way that suggested he hadn't walked far. He bowed. Introduced himself as Takashi from an Osaka-based startup investing in empathy-forward fintech. He smiled the way men do when they've practiced sincerity. We're launching a micro-lending platform built on community trust. We think your shop, your story, might make the perfect case study. Junko poured tea, listened, didn't blink. He talked about emotional credit scores, AI-driven forgiveness timers, reward points for grace. She said nothing. At the end, he leaned in. Of course, we'd honor the tradition. Folded icons, maybe a legacy logo. We'd even consider naming a tier after the original, Taro-level reliability. What do you think? Junko stood, took 2 steps to the counter, picked up a small paperweight, an old brass bell, dented but heavy. She set it gently on the table in front of him. This was once used to settle debts without words, she said softly. Just a ring. Just wait. Takashi smiled again, confused. Junko leaned forward. Ring it. He hesitated. Lifted it. Let it chime once. A thin note. Pure. Fragile. Then she spoke. Now tell me who you just forgave. He blinked. Fumbled. Forgave? Yes, that's what it used to mean. 1 ring. 1 forgiveness. He stammered. Mentioned brand alignment. Spoke of narrative framing. Junko smiled sadly. Then it's just noise. He left. No sale. No pitch. No tier named after ghosts. And the bell? It stayed on the table. Quiet again. Because she wasn't angry. Just protecting emptiness. The sacred kind. Later that evening, Junko walked the alleys behind Tenoji. She wasn't looking for anything, but found something anyway. A boy, maybe 10, crouched by a vending machine, folding an envelope. His fingers were clumsy, but careful. She watched. He looked up, startled. I'm not stealing, he said quickly. I know, she replied. You're folding. He nodded. It's for my brother. He sat. What will you write inside? The boy shrugged. Nothing. That's what he needs. She crouched beside him, folded her own, left it beside his. He never asked who she was. Didn't need to, because in that quiet corner of Osaka, lit by fluorescent hum and city breath, the rhythm found a new foothold, not in legacy, not in systems, but in a child folding paper in the dark, and knowing that silence can speak more than anything you print on a screen. The city was in bloom again. Not cherry blossoms, those were still months away, but something quieter, less seasonal. You could feel it in the way people waited at crosswalks without tapping their feet, in the softening of shoulders on subway cars. In the extra second, a clerk held a customer's gaze, not out of obligation, but care. It wasn't Taro City anymore. It was everyone's, and yet his rhythm still moved like breath through it. Junko knew this would be her last winter at the shop. She wasn't sick. She wasn't forced out. But she felt it. That kind of gentle goodbye that arrives without warning and simply sits with you until you nod. She'd told Naoya. He nodded. Didn't argue. You'll stay in the city? He asked. For now, she replied. But not in the shop. What then? She smiled. Maybe I'll start folding backwards. See what that teaches me. He laughed, and in that moment, the last remaining original rhythm keepers simply agreed to stop keeping. The rhythm would move without them, and it did. The final bento she made was for a man who didn't speak. Elderly, eyes like fog, hands too steady for someone his age. He left exact change, bowed, and slipped a folded shape under the tray. Junko waited until he'd gone, unfolded it. Inside, no message. Just creases, interwoven, layered, impossibly precise. It wasn't origami. It was memory, folded in geometry. She didn't need words. She knew. And as she stood there, breath caught between past and present, the door opened again. This time, it wasn't a customer. It was Rina, the tattoo artist who once made flyers across vending machines. older now, wiser. Her hands, inked with patterns that looked vaguely like waves, carried a small box. "From the wall," she said. Junko opened it. Inside, fragments of Naoya's mural, painted wood, candle-warmed color. Still smelled like stone and smoke. He said if the wall was ever painted over, we should scatter this. Junko smiled. "Not scatter," she said. "Fold." So they did. They took the fragments, softened their edges, and folded them into reminders. Not shapes, not forms, just curves and creases meant to hold meaning, not display it. And they left them on buses, in stairwells, at playground benches, on grave markers, at ATM vestibules at midnight. No logos, no legends, no hashtags, just quiet. And still it moved. A young woman, walking home from her shift, found one wedged into a railing. She unfolded it, smiled, tucked it in her coat, didn't know why it mattered, only that it did. A school teacher, exhausted, found another in his drawer, folded tight around a paperclip. He paused, breathed, decided not to assign extra homework that day, and a father, carrying too many burdens, found one in his son's backpack. No note, just the sense that someone knew, because the fold was never about shape. It was about weight, the kind of weight you choose to carry, and the kind you forgive others for carrying badly. So Junko, in her last act as rhythm keeper, walked to the train station. Same bench, same wind, same city. She left a folded umbrella under the bench, not because anyone needed it, but because someone might. And that's always enough, because in the soft hum of cities that care, there's always a moment, however brief, where a person pauses, senses the fold, and remembers that debt isn't always money, that forgiveness doesn't require an apology, and that rhythm, the kind that saves people, gently, without explanation, can still be passed on in silence. So now, if your breathing has softened and the room around you feels a little quieter, maybe it's time to let go of the rest of the day. The story has folded itself closed, not with a bang, not even with a bow, but with a crease, soft and intentional. Let your mind drift backward over the alleys of Osaka, over bentos served without judgment, over slips of paper that weighed more than gold. You don't have to remember every detail. The rhythm remembers for you. Let the pace of your thoughts slow. No need to revisit. No need to explain. You've walked the arc from shadows to silence, and now you're allowed to rest. Imagine the city lights dimming, the clatter fading, the folding doors of the train sliding shut with a gentle sigh. You're not boarding. You're simply watching. Safe. Still. And if somewhere in your day there was weight or worry or an edge too sharp to name, let it press into the crease now. Let it soften. Because the rhythm was never about fixing everything. It was about letting it land softly. So take one more deep breath. Exhale slowly, and allow this quiet to be enough. No umbrella needed tonight. Just you, still and folded into sleep.